I had always been an adventurous soul. The thrill of the unknown and the call of the wild had guided me through countless trails and uncharted paths. But nothing could have prepared me for that one fateful journey into the dense, foreboding woods. It was a crisp autumn morning when I set out, the leaves beneath my boots crunching like brittle bones. A cold wind rustled the trees and I shivered, though I couldn't tell if it was from excitement or the chilling breeze. The forest loomed before me, a sea of trees that seemed to stretch endlessly. I had heard tales of its vastness, but my youthful arrogance led me to believe I could conquer it. As I ventured deeper, the trees closed in around me, casting long, sinister shadows. The sunlight filtered through the leaves in sporadic beams, creating a scary patchwork of light and dark. With each step, my sense of direction began to blur. The trail I'd followed was gradually erased by the relentless march of the undergrowth. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, but I pushed it away, convincing myself that I could backtrack. Hours passed, and my futile attempts to retrace my steps only left me more disoriented. The forest was a labyrinth, a place where time and space seemed to warp and twist, playing tricks on my senses. The more I struggled to find my way, the further I sank into the heart of the wilderness. My hunger gnawed at my insides, and the water in my canteen was running dangerously low. Panic had now fully engulfed me. The forest felt sentient, as though it were mocking my feeble attempts to escape. The distant calls of wildlife became whispers, and the rustling leaves carried unsettling secrets. I felt as if I was being watched, stalked by something unseen. Night fell like a shroud, and I huddled under a makeshift shelter of leaves and branches, feeling utterly exposed. The chilling symphony of the forest at night enveloped me, the howls of distant animals and the rustling of unseen creatures. Sleep was elusive, as every rustle or distant sound sent me into a state of high alert. Morning brought no solace. The woods seemed to have transformed overnight, the once familiar path now a maze of confusion. I decided to walk in a straight line, desperate to escape this haunting place. But the forest had other plans. It led me in circles, and my strength waned with each step. I was hungry, tired, and on the brink of despair. It was then that I saw him, or at least I thought I did. A shadowy figure darted between the trees just at the edge of my vision. My heart raced, and I chased after it, convinced it was my way out. But the figure remained elusive, a phantom in the woods. Days turned into weeks, and my desperation grew. I survived on a diet of berries and rainwater, but it was far from enough. My once taut frame had become emaciated, and my clothes clung to my shrunken body. The lines between reality and delusion blurred, and I often heard voices calling my name from the darkness, though no one was there. One night, as I lay beneath a twisted oak tree, the forest revealed its true nature. I was jolted awake by the sensation of something warm and wet on my hand. In the pale moonlight, I saw it. An animal carcass, torn and eviscerated, its entrails spread around my shelter like a gruesome offering. Fear clenched my heart as I realized the cruel message that the forest had sent. It was as if the wilderness had become a sentient, sinister entity, toying with me, luring me deeper into its clutches. I knew then that I was no longer alone in these woods, but I could never be sure who or what was watching me. The forest held secrets darker than the night, and I had become ensnared in its web of terror. Hunger and fear drove me to the brink of madness, and I began to question my own sanity. And then, one fateful day, I saw him again. The shadowy figure, this time closer, more distinct. It was a man, disheveled and wild, with eyes that held a hint of madness. He beckoned to me, his voice a mere whisper on the wind. In my fragile state, I followed him without question, convinced that he was my salvation. He led me to a small clearing in the heart of the forest, where a ramshackle cabin stood. It was a crude structure, cobbled together from rotting wood and tattered cloth. Inside, a fire crackled in a makeshift hearth, casting mystic shadows on the walls. The man, whose name was Elijah, explained that he had been lost in the woods for years, just like me. He had learned to survive in this unforgiving wilderness, and he offered me food and shelter. Desperation clouded my judgment, and I accepted his hospitality, though a nagging voice in my mind warned me that there was something deeply unsettling about him. Days turned into weeks as I lived in the cabin with Elijah, my only companion in this forsaken place. He spoke of the forest as if it were a living, breathing entity, a dark force that demanded sacrifices. He claimed that he had made a pact with the forest, offering it sustenance in return for his own survival. As the weeks passed, I began to notice the gruesome trophies that adorned the cabin's walls, skulls of animals and even a few human bones. It was then that the horrifying truth began to dawn on me. Elijah was not merely a survivor, he was a part of the very darkness that had consumed the forest. He was a cannibal. The realization struck me like a lightning bolt, and I knew I had to escape. But the forest, now even more sinister, seemed to tighten its grip on me. Every attempt to leave was thwarted, as if the trees themselves conspired to keep me there. Elijah's sanity unraveled further, and he spoke of the forest's insatiable hunger, of the countless lost souls who had met their end within its depths. I knew that my only chance lay in outwitting Elijah, and so I bided my time, pretending to embrace his twisted worldview. I learned his routines and waited for the right moment. One fateful night, as he lay in a feverish sleep, I made my move. The forest, it seemed, had grown tired of its plaything. I crept out of the cabin, my heart pounding like a drum, and plunged deeper into the woods, my every step a prayer to the forces of nature for salvation. The forest seemed to part before me, as if it had grown weary of the game, and I stumbled upon a trail. With a newfound burst of energy, I followed it, guided by the distant glow of moonlight. But I was free, and I would never forget the horrors I had witnessed within the heart of the unforgiving forest. The tale of my ordeal became a cautionary legend among those who dared to enter the woods, a reminder of the darkness that could consume even the most adventurous souls. I've always had a deep love for the outdoors, so it wasn't unusual for me to spend weekends exploring new hiking trails in the wilderness of upstate New York. This particular weekend, I decided to venture into the vast Catskill Mountains, an area renowned for its beauty and serenity. The crisp morning air greeted me as I embarked on my hike, following a well-marked trail into the dense forest. The path was clear and the sun filtered through the leaves, casting a dappled light on the forest floor. The sounds of nature surrounded me, from the chirping of birds to the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. As I hiked deeper into the woods, I became increasingly aware of the sheer solitude that enveloped me. There was a tranquil and a dead silence that settled over the forest. Although I was alone, I couldn't help but feel as if unseen eyes were watching my every step. The feeling was unnerving, but I shrugged it off as a product of the profound quiet. Hours passed as I ventured further into the forest. The trail had become narrower and the dense underbrush encroached on both sides. I felt a sense of vulnerability, a realization that I was in a remote area where help was far from reach. My goal for the day had been to reach a pristine mountain lake I had read about, nestled deep within the Catskills. It was rumored to be a hidden gem, a place of breathtaking beauty. But as the day wore on, I began to worry that I had veered off the path. I took out my map and compass to assess my location, but to my shock, I couldn't find them. Panic surged through me as I realized that I must have left them behind at my last rest stop. I cursed my carelessness, but told myself that I could rely on my intuition and make my way back. I turned to retrace my steps, but to my surprise, the trail I had been following seemed to have disappeared. The once clear path had become an overgrown tangle of branches and underbrush. I fought back the rising fear and decided to push forward, confident that I could eventually find my way back to the main trail. The hours passed and my sense of unease deepened as I continued to walk deeper into the woods. The forest around me had grown unfamiliar, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was lost. The towering trees seemed to loom over me, their branches blocking out the sunlight. The stillness of the woods was broken only by the occasional call of a distant bird. As the day turned into evening, I made the difficult decision to set up camp. I gathered wood for a fire and constructed a makeshift shelter using branches and leaves. The night was quiet and dark, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. The following morning, I was determined to find my way back to civilization. I scoured the area for any signs of the trail, but it was as if the path had vanished entirely. I couldn't understand how I had managed to get so disoriented in what should have been a straightforward hike. I continued to walk, driven by a growing sense of desperation. The forest felt like a labyrinth, with no clear direction or landmarks to guide me. The solitude of the wilderness, which had once been so serene, now felt oppressive and isolating. Each step I took seemed to lead me further into the depths of the forest, away from the familiar world I had known. The shadows of the trees cast long shapes on the ground, and the silence was punctuated only by the sounds of my own footsteps. I searched for any signs of human activity, a path, or a clearing that might lead me to safety, but the forest held no answers. I couldn't help but feel as if I had stepped into a different world, a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. Desperate to find my way back. My supplies were running low, and I had no means of communication with the outside world. I was well and truly alone, a lost soul in the heart of the Catskills. The forest offered no relief from the oppressive silence, and the solitude weighed heavily on my shoulders. The feeling of being watched never left me, and I couldn't escape the sensation that I was not alone. In my desperate search for a way out, I stumbled upon a small, decrepit cabin deep in the woods. It was an unexpected discovery, a structure that seemed out of place in the heart of the wilderness. I approached cautiously, the cabin's weathered walls casting long, creepy shadows in the fading light. Inside, I found the remnants of a life long gone. Old furniture, rusted cookware, and faded photographs covered the cabin's interior. It was as if time had stood still, frozen in a moment from the past. I couldn't help but wonder who had lived in the cabin and what had become of them. The place seemed abandoned, but there was an unsettling feeling of being watched, as if the walls themselves held secrets. I spent the night in the cabin, sheltered from the elements. The hours passed slowly, the darkness outside growing more oppressive. I couldn't escape the feeling that the forest was closing in around me, that I was a mere intruder in a place that did not belong to me. The following morning, I continued my journey through the woods, determined to find a way out. But the forest seemed intent on keeping its secrets. I came across strange symbols carved into the trees, intricate patterns that seemed to form a trail of their own. I followed them, hoping they would lead me to safety, but they only seemed to take me deeper into the wilderness. The sense of isolation and despair deepened with each passing day. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn deeper into the heart of the forest, as if it had a scary will of its own. I fought to keep my hope alive, clinging to the belief that I would one day find my way back to civilization. The forest had become my prison, a place of fear and uncertainty, and I was a lost soul in a realm of shadows and enigma. In the end, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had ventured into a world where time had no meaning, a place where the boundaries between the known and the unknown had blurred and merged. The forest had become a place of isolation and fear, and I was forever lost in its depths. My ordeal in the wilderness had been a descent into the unknown, a journey into a realm of solitude and desperation. The forest had revealed its enigmatic and unforgiving nature, and I had emerged from the experience forever changed. I had returned from the depths of the wilderness, but the memories of my time lost in the woods would continue to haunt me, a reminder of the beauty and the dangers that exist in the natural world. I've always been a nature enthusiast, and hiking has been a passion of mine for as long as I can remember. It was a sunny Saturday morning when I decided to embark on a solo hiking adventure in a remote and less traveled part of the Rocky Mountains. The idea was to find tranquility, to escape the bustling city life and reconnect with nature. The trail I chose led into an uncharted territory, a region that had been rarely explored by hikers. It was an area rich in dense forests, rolling hills, and breathtaking vistas. The promise of solitude and a genuine wilderness experience excited me. The day began with optimism and a sense of adventure. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the trees as I hiked deeper into the woods. The trail was marked, but it became increasingly overgrown and less maintained as I progressed. It was clear that few had ventured this far, but that only added to the appeal. The songs of birds and the rustling of leaves underfoot accompanied me. As the day wore on, I paused by a tranquil creek to refill my water bottle. The sun dappled the water's surface, and I could see small fish darting in the clear stream. I was in awe of the untouched beauty of the place. My goal was to reach a high ridge from which I'd have a panoramic view of the surrounding wilderness. I knew I would need to make camp up there for the night. With each step, I felt more disconnected from the outside world and more attuned to the wilderness that enveloped me. As the sun began to set, I found the perfect spot on the ridge to set up my campsite. I pitched my tent near the edge where I'd have a clear view of the sunrise. I sat by the fire, cooking a simple meal, and watching the stars twinkle above. But as night fell, the forest around me came alive with strange sounds. Owls hooted in the distance and the leaves rustled in the breeze. It was the kind of experience I had yearned for, and I was fully in my element. However, it was during the night that my journey took an unsettling turn. I awoke to a cold, chilling howl that echoed through the trees. It was unlike any sound I had ever heard, a low and mournful cry that sent shivers down my spine. My heart raced as I listened to the haunting howl. It was followed by more, as if a pack of unseen creatures were communicating through the night. Fear gripped me, and I realized that I was not alone in the wilderness. I had been trained to handle encounters with wildlife and knew that some animals could be territorial or curious, but this felt different. The howling continued, drawing nearer to my campsite. The sensation of being watched grew stronger, and I began to question whether this was a natural occurrence or something more ominous. With a flashlight in hand, I unzipped the tent and peered into the darkness. I couldn't see anything beyond the circle of light, but the howling was closer now, echoing from the surrounding trees. My instincts told me to remain in the tent, but curiosity and fear pushed me to investigate. I cautiously made my way to the edge of the ridge, where the forest below was obscured by shadows. The howling grew louder, and I began to make out the silhouettes of creatures moving through the underbrush. Their eyes gleamed with a scary, phosphorescent glow in the dim light of my flashlight. It was a pack of wolves, their silvery fur illuminated by the beam of my flashlight. They moved with a fluid grace, circling my campsite, their eyes locked onto me. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the pack. It was a mesmerizing and terrifying sight. I had encountered wolves before, but I had never seen them behave like this, so close to a human presence. The leader of the pack, a massive silver-coated wolf, approached the edge of the ridge and locked eyes with me. Its gaze was intense and unwavering, as if it held a deep intelligence. I knew better than to run or make any sudden movements. For what felt like an eternity, I and the wolf maintained our silent standoff, each assessing the other. The howling of the pack had ceased, and the forest was still. The moment was surreal, a connection between man and beast in the heart of the wilderness. Then, with a subtle nod of its head, the wolf turned and led the pack back into the darkness of the forest. The dark phosphorescent glow of their eyes faded into the night, and the howling resumed, echoing through the trees as they disappeared from view. I was left with a profound sense of wonder and a touch of fear. The wilderness had a way of revealing its secrets, and I had just witnessed a spectacle that few could claim to have experienced. The following morning, I awoke to the sound of birdsong and the warmth of the rising sun. The wolves were gone, leaving only their footprints and the memory of their haunting presence. I continued my hike, my perspective on the wilderness forever changed. I marveled at the untamed beauty of the land and the mysteries that it held. It was a reminder that even in the most remote corners of the world, we are not truly alone. As the days passed, I trekked deeper into the uncharted woods, exploring landscapes that few had laid eyes on. The trail had become less defined and the forest more untamed, but I continued on, driven by a sense of adventure and the allure of the unknown. The solitude of the wilderness surrounded me, and I embraced it as a kind of sanctuary. I couldn't help but feel that the forest had revealed a side of itself to me, a realm that few would ever have the privilege to witness. But as time passed, I began to realize that I was venturing deeper into uncharted territory, away from the well-trodden paths of civilization. The forest had a way of distorting time and space, and the sense of isolation grew stronger with each passing day. I continued my journey, searching for the next breathtaking vista, the next uncharted wonder. My supplies were dwindling, and my encounters with wildlife became more frequent. In the end, I couldn't help but wonder if the uncharted woods held a truth that was beyond my comprehension, a realm of solitude and fascination that would forever remain a mystery. My journey had been a descent into the unknown, a venture into a realm of fear and wonder, and I had emerged from the experience forever changed. I had returned from the depths of the wilderness, but the memories of my time in the uncharted woods would continue to haunt me, a reminder of the beauty and the uncertainty that exist in the natural world. As I sit here alone in this forgotten room, The memories of that fateful summer flood back, like a relentless tide of darkness. I never thought I'd be entangled in something so sinister, so surreal. But here I am, recounting my story, hoping that it serves as a cautionary tale. It all began innocently enough. I had recently graduated from college, eager to embark on the adventure of adult life. The world stretched out before me, full of possibilities. I had moved to a new city and was slowly settling into my job. But something was missing. A sense of belonging, a community. Little did I know that longing would lead me down a path I could never have imagined. One sunny afternoon, while sipping coffee at a local cafe, I noticed a flyer on the community board. It was an invitation to a gathering promising enlightenment and inner peace. The group called themselves the Cult of the Silent Shadows. The flyer showed a serene, masked figure bathed in moonlight, holding a candle. It piqued my curiosity, and with nothing to lose, I decided to attend their meeting. The address led me to an unassuming building on the outskirts of town. I entered a room filled with people of all ages, races, and backgrounds. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, and I felt an immediate sense of camaraderie. It seemed like the community I had been searching for. Their leader, a charismatic man named Gabriel, took the stage. He was a tall figure with piercing blue eyes and an air of magnetism that was impossible to ignore. He spoke eloquently about the struggles of modern life, the chaos of the world, and the need for inner tranquility. "We are the Silent Shadows," he proclaimed, "and we offer you a path to serenity, away from the noise and distractions of the outside world." His words resonated with me as they did with everyone else in the room. Gabriel spoke of meditation, mindfulness, and the power of silence in a world filled with constant chatter. It all sounded so appealing, so simple. Over the next few weeks, I attended the Silent Shadows gatherings regularly. The teachings became the anchor of my life. Gabriel's charisma and the sense of belonging I found within the group were addictive. I was not alone in my devotion, many others were equally captivated. As the days turned into months, the group's activities grew more intense. We were encouraged to immerse ourselves fully in their teachings. I began spending more time with my fellow members, often at the cult's secluded retreat deep in the woods. It was during one of these retreats that I began to notice something strange. The teachings, once focused on meditation and mindfulness, had taken a darker turn. Gabriel spoke of the need to shed our former selves, to become shadows of our former lives. He preached the power of silence, not just as a form of meditation, but as a way of life. The group started practicing silence for days at a time, communicating only through gestures and writing. We were discouraged from contacting our families and friends outside the cult, as they were seen as distractions from our true purpose. I began to feel a growing unease, but my attachment to Gabriel and the community kept me from questioning too deeply. I was not alone in my hesitation, but no one dared to speak out against the charismatic leader. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Gabriel gathered us around a roaring bonfire. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Gabriel announced that to become true Silent Shadows, we must undergo a ritual of purification. The ritual involved fasting for 3 days, spending all our waking hours in complete silence and meditating by the fire. It was meant to cleanse our minds and souls, to make us more receptive to the cult's teachings. I felt a knot of dread in my stomach but couldn't bring myself to refuse. As the days of fasting passed, I became increasingly weak. My body ached, and my mind felt like a stormy sea. The silence, once soothing, now pressed down on me like a heavy weight. It was as if we were all sinking into a darkness, a collective silence that threatened to swallow us whole. On the third night of the ritual, something changed. As we meditated around the fire, the flames seemed to dance with an eerie, unnatural intensity. Gabriel stood at the center, his eyes closed in deep concentration. Then, with a sudden and unsettling calmness, he began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. The chant grew louder and more fervent, and the flames leaped higher, casting bizarre, flickering shadows on the faces of the cult members. I watched in growing horror as the atmosphere shifted from one of serenity to something altogether different. It was at that moment that I realized the true nature of the Silent Shadows. We were not a community seeking enlightenment and inner peace. We were pawns in Gabriel's grand delusion. He had manipulated us into a cult of silence, using our vulnerability and desire for belonging against us. I knew I had to escape. With trembling hands, I rose from my meditation spot and slowly backed away from the fire. The cult members were so engrossed in the ritual that they didn't notice my departure. I slipped into the darkness of the woods, my heart pounding like a drum. As I made my way back to civilization, I couldn't help but wonder about the fate of my fellow cult members. Had they truly become the silent shadows Gabriel had envisioned? Or had they fallen victim to a madness born of silence and isolation? I reported the cult to the authorities, but by the time they arrived at the retreat, it was empty. Gabriel and his followers had vanished, leaving behind only the lingering echoes of their chilling silence. In the years that followed, I rebuilt my life, forever haunted by the memory of the silent shadows. I learned the hard way that the quest for belonging and purpose can sometimes lead us down the darkest of paths, and I vowed to never let the shadows of silence consume me again. But even now, as I sit here alone, I can't shake the feeling that Gabriel and his cult are still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next unsuspecting victim. The darkness of that summer still clings to me, a constant reminder of the horrors that can hide behind a mask of serenity. Months had passed since my escape from the cult of the silent shadows. I had rebuilt my life, but the memories of that nightmarish experience continued to haunt my every waking moment. I couldn't help but wonder what had become of my fellow cult members, and whether Gabriel and his twisted teachings still held them in their grip. I kept a low profile, fearing that the cult might somehow track me down. My days were spent in constant vigilance, always watching my back, always on edge. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Gabriel and his followers were out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. One day, as I was going through my mail, I came across a letter. It was an anonymous message, a simple piece of paper with a single word written in bold letters: silence. My heart raced as I realized that the cult had found me, or at least someone who knew about my past involvement with them. I had to find out who sent the letter, and more importantly, whether the cult was still active. I began to dig deeper, retracing my steps and reaching out to former cult members who had managed to break free like me. It wasn't easy. Many were still too frightened to talk, but gradually I pieced together a picture of what had transpired after my escape. It seemed that in the wake of my departure, the cult had become even more secretive and reclusive. They had changed their meeting locations frequently, always staying one step ahead of anyone who might be looking for them. Gabriel's hold on his followers had grown stronger, and his teachings had taken a more extreme turn. Rumors circulated that the cult had become involved in criminal activities, using their collective silence as a cover for illegal operations. But these were only whispers, and concrete information was hard to come by. Determined to expose the cult and bring an end to their reign of silence, I reached out to a journalist friend who had a reputation for investigating secretive organizations. With the evidence I had gathered, we began to dig deeper into the activities of the cult of the silent shadows. Our investigation led us down a twisted and treacherous path. We followed leads, interviewed former cult members, and even managed to infiltrate some of their gatherings undercover. What we discovered was chilling. The cult had evolved into a tightly knit, secretive society with Gabriel as its unquestioned leader. His charisma and manipulative tactics had only grown more potent over time. The members had become fanatical in their devotion, believing that silence was the key to ultimate enlightenment. But behind the facade of serenity and inner peace lay a darker truth. The cult had indeed become involved in criminal activities, ranging from money laundering to extortion. Their network stretched far and wide, with members in positions of power and influence across various industries. As we delved deeper into our investigation, we realized that exposing the cult would not be easy. They had eyes and ears everywhere, and anyone who tried to speak out against them faced threats, intimidation, and even violence. But we were determined to unmask the shadows and bring an end to their reign of terror. We compiled our findings, collected evidence, and prepared to blow the lid off the cult of the silent shadows. Our investigative report was set to be published in a major newspaper, promising to expose the cult's criminal activities and the dangers they posed to society. But as the publication date drew nearer, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. My fears were realized on the night before the report was scheduled to be released. I received another anonymous message, this time more ominous than the first. It was a simple warning: silence is golden. I immediately contacted my journalist friend, and we decided to go public with the threats we had received. We believed that the cult would think twice about taking any drastic action if their actions were brought to light. The next day, as the report hit the headlines, the cult's reaction was swift and brutal. They released a statement denying all allegations and accusing us of spreading lies and slander. Gabriel, in a chilling video message, warned that those who sought to expose the cult's secrets would face dire consequences. Despite our fears, we pressed on, believing that the power of truth and justice would prevail. But the cult was not to be underestimated. They launched a campaign of harassment and intimidation against us, trying to discredit our investigation and silence us through any means necessary. As the pressure mounted, my journalist friend and I received a tip that Gabriel and his inner circle would be holding a secret gathering in an isolated location. It was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. We contacted law enforcement and provided them with the information we had gathered. On the night of the raid, we accompanied the police to the remote location where the cult's gathering was taking place. The tension was palpable as we approached the compound. We knew that this would be the moment of reckoning, the final showdown with the cult of the Silent Shadows. As we stormed the compound, a fierce battle ensued. Gabriel and his followers, armed with unwavering devotion and a willingness to protect their secrets at all costs, put up a formidable resistance. But the combined efforts of law enforcement and the evidence we had gathered proved to be their undoing. Gabriel was arrested, and his mask of charisma finally shattered. The cult members were taken into custody, their reign of silence broken. The truth about their criminal activities was exposed for the world to see. In the aftermath of the raid, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led me from a naive seeker of belonging to an unwitting victim of a dangerous cult, and finally to a crusader for justice. The cult of the Silent Shadows had been dismantled, its darkness brought into the light. But the scars it had left on my psyche and the lives of its former members would never fully heal. I had learned the hard way that the search for meaning and community could sometimes lead to places of unimaginable darkness. The experience left me with a profound sense of caution and a determination to be vigilant against the allure of charismatic leaders and their promises of enlightenment. As I looked back on the long and harrowing journey, I couldn't help but wonder if the shadows of the cult would ever truly fade away, or if they would continue to haunt me, like a lingering echo of silence in the darkest corners of my mind. My name is Sarah, and I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood with my loving parents, David and Linda, and my younger brother, Michael. We were an ordinary family, leading an ordinary life. Our days were filled with school, work, and the occasional family outing. But that all changed one fateful day. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when we first encountered the cult. David had taken us to the local farmers market, a place we often visited on weekends. As we strolled among the stalls, sampling fresh produce and enjoying the vibrant atmosphere, a woman approached us. She was dressed in simple robes, her demeanor calm and serene. "Hello," she said with a warm smile. "I couldn't help but notice your family. You seem like kindred spirits." We exchanged pleasantries, and the woman introduced herself as Emily. She spoke of a community called the Tranquil Souls, a group of like-minded individuals seeking inner peace and enlightenment. Emily's words were captivating, and we found ourselves drawn to her presence. Over the following weeks, Emily became a frequent visitor to our home. She brought with her the teachings of the Tranquil Souls, a philosophy centered around mindfulness, meditation, and a simpler way of life. She spoke of finding tranquility in a chaotic world, and her words resonated deeply with my family. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Emily proposed that we attend one of the Tranquil Souls gatherings. "It's an opportunity to experience our community firsthand," she said, "to see if it aligns with your desires for inner peace." We were hesitant at first, but the allure of tranquility and the sense of belonging that Emily offered were too enticing to resist. With her guidance, we made the decision to visit the Tranquil Souls. Our first gathering with the Tranquil Souls was held in an idyllic rural setting. A small group of people dressed in robes similar to Emily's welcomed us with open arms. They exuded an air of serenity that was both captivating and unnerving. The teachings of the Tranquil Souls revolved around meditation, minimalism, and the renunciation of worldly possessions. At first, it seemed like a path to inner peace, a way to simplify our lives and find a sense of purpose. But as time went on, the teachings became increasingly extreme. We were encouraged to sever ties with our old lives, to let go of our possessions, and to embrace a life of austerity. The cult members spoke in hushed tones about the need to transcend the material world and reach a higher state of consciousness. My family and I became increasingly isolated from our friends and extended family as the tranquil souls became the center of our lives. Emily, once a mere acquaintance, had become our de facto leader. Her charisma and unwavering devotion to the cult were impossible to resist. As the cult's grip on our family tightened, I began to notice disturbing changes in my parents and brother. They had become increasingly distant, their eyes vacant and hollow. The cult's teachings had taken a darker turn, emphasizing the need for complete submission and the rejection of individuality. I tried to reason with my family, to convince them that we were headed down a dangerous path, but my words fell on deaf ears. They saw me as an outsider, a threat to their newfound sense of purpose. One evening, I overheard a chilling conversation between my parents and Emily. They spoke of a final ceremony that would allow them to transcend the material world and achieve true enlightenment. The details were shrouded in secrecy, but the sense of foreboding in the air was palpable. Terrified for my family's safety, I reached out to a childhood friend, Rebecca, who had been concerned about our sudden withdrawal from society. I confided in her about the tranquil souls and their increasingly sinister teachings. Rebecca, now a journalist, took it upon herself to investigate the cult. She uncovered a trail of disappearances, financial irregularities, and allegations of mind control associated with the tranquil souls. It became clear that the cult was not what it appeared to be. Together, we devised a plan to rescue my family from the clutches of the tranquil souls. We contacted law enforcement, providing them with the evidence Rebecca had gathered. It was a race against time to stop the impending final ceremony. As the authorities prepared to raid the cult's compound, Rebecca and I infiltrated the tranquil souls in disguise. We attended one of their gatherings, where the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. The cult members, dressed in their robes, gathered around a massive bonfire. Emily stood at the center, her eyes closed in deep concentration. The cult's teachings had culminated in this moment, and I feared what would happen next. As the authorities closed in on the compound, Rebecca and I sprang into action. We distracted the cult members, urging them to reconsider their choices, while law enforcement moved in to apprehend Emily and the cult leaders. A tense standoff ensued, but ultimately the cult members, my family included, were freed from the clutches of the tranquil souls. Emily and the cult leaders were arrested, their twisted beliefs exposed for all to see. In the aftermath of the rescue operation, my family and I faced a long and difficult journey of recovery. The hold of the tranquil souls had left deep scars, both physical and psychological. But with the support of therapy and the love of our extended family and friends, we began the process of healing. Rebecca's investigative reporting on the cult led to a nationwide expose, shedding light on the dangers of cults and the tactics they use to manipulate and control their members. The tranquil souls were disbanded and their leaders faced justice for their crimes. As I look back on that harrowing chapter of our lives, I can't help but reflect on the thin line between seeking inner peace and falling prey to the allure of a charismatic leader and a dangerous ideology. My family and I emerged from the darkness stronger and wiser, with a newfound appreciation for the importance of critical thinking and the bonds of love that hold a family together. The tranquil souls may have left their mark on us, but we refused to let their darkness define us. We were survivors, and we were determined to live our lives with newfound strength, resilience, and a commitment to never let the shadows of a cult engulf us again. My name is Mark, and I've always considered myself a rational and level-headed individual. I was in a loving relationship with my girlfriend, Emily, who shared my passion for adventure and self-improvement. We enjoyed exploring new places, seeking out unique experiences, and pushing the boundaries of our comfort zones. Life was a grand adventure with Emily by my side. One sunny afternoon, as Emily and I were sipping coffee at our favorite local cafe, she excitedly showed me a beautifully designed invitation. It was embossed with intricate symbols and read, "The Benevolent Cult of the Hidden Truth." Emily explained that she had stumbled upon this group online and had been following their teachings for a while. She believed that they held the key to enlightenment and personal growth. The idea of joining a group called a cult made me uneasy, but Emily insisted that it was different. She claimed that they were focused on self-improvement, kindness, and uncovering hidden truths about oneself and the world. With her enthusiasm and persuasive arguments, I reluctantly agreed to attend their introductory meeting. The introductory meeting took place in a cozy yet elegant room in an inconspicuous building. We were greeted by friendly and seemingly ordinary individuals who welcomed us warmly. Emily introduced me to the group's leader, a charismatic woman named Sophia, who exuded an air of calm and wisdom. Sophia began by explaining the group's philosophy centered around kindness, self-discovery, and the pursuit of hidden truths. She emphasized that they were not a typical cult, but rather a community of like-minded individuals seeking to improve themselves and make the world a better place. Emily and I attended several more meetings, each one focusing on personal development, mindfulness, and the cultivation of empathy. The group's teachings were captivating, and I started to believe that perhaps I had misunderstood the word cult. As the months went by, Emily became increasingly involved in the benevolent cult of the hidden truth. She attended their gatherings more frequently, sometimes staying overnight at their retreats. She spoke passionately about the positive changes she was experiencing and urged me to become more involved. But something didn't sit right with me. I noticed that Emily was becoming more distant from our friends and family, and her devotion to the group was bordering on obsession. She began to spend less time with me, and I couldn't help but feel like I was losing her to the cult. One evening, I decided to investigate the group further. I attended one of their gatherings without Emily's knowledge, hoping to uncover the truth behind their seemingly benevolent facade. As I arrived at the retreat, I noticed a serene atmosphere, with participants engaged in meditation and deep philosophical discussions. Sophia, the charismatic leader, led a session focused on the concept of inner purity and the need to shed one's past to embrace a brighter future. But then, as the night wore on, I witnessed something terrifying. The group's teachings took a darker turn. Sophia began speaking about the ultimate truth that could only be achieved through sacrifice. She spoke of letting go of one's attachments, even to loved ones, to attain a higher state of consciousness. I knew I had to act quickly. The group's teachings had taken a disturbing turn, and I feared for Emily's safety. I reached out to a friend, Alex, who had experience in investigating cults and the tactics they used to manipulate their members. Together, we delved deeper into the benevolent cult of the hidden truth, uncovering a trail of disappearances, financial irregularities, and allegations of psychological manipulation. It became clear that this cult was far more sinister than it appeared. We also discovered that Sophia, the cult's leader, had a history of leading similar groups that had all ended in tragedy. She had a talent for drawing in vulnerable individuals and using her charisma to exploit them. With the evidence we had gathered, Alex and I contacted law enforcement and shared our findings. It was clear that Emily was in grave danger, along with the other members of the cult. We knew that we had to act swiftly to rescue them from Sophia's grip. We devised a plan to infiltrate the cult's compound during one of their retreats. With the help of law enforcement, we would apprehend Sophia and her followers and put an end to their reign of darkness. The night of the rescue mission was tense with anticipation. Alex and I disguised ourselves as cult members, armed with the evidence we had collected, and a determination to free Emily and the others from the clutches of the benevolent cult of the hidden truth. As we infiltrated the cult's compound, we witnessed Emily and the other members gathered around a massive bonfire. Sophia, in her charismatic and persuasive manner, was preparing them for the ultimate truth, which involved a ritualistic act of sacrifice. With law enforcement at the ready, we began to confront the cult members, urging them to reconsider their choices and the darkness that had enveloped their lives. Sophia, however, was not easily swayed. A tense standoff ensued, with cult members torn between their loyalty to Sophia and the evidence of her dark intentions. As the authorities closed in, Sophia's grip began to weaken, and some members started to question their devotion. In the end, Emily and the other cult members were freed from the clutches of the benevolent cult of the hidden truth. Sophia was arrested, her charismatic facade shattered. The truth about the cult's sinister activities was exposed for the world to see. As Emily and I emerged from the darkness of the cult's influence, we faced a long and challenging road to recovery. The scars ran deep, both physically and emotionally. But with the support of therapy and the love of our friends and family, we began the process of healing. The benevolent cult of the hidden truth may have left its mark on us, but we were determined to emerge stronger and wiser, with a newfound appreciation for the importance of critical thinking and the bonds of love that held us together. Looking back on that harrowing chapter of our lives, I can't help but reflect on the fine line between seeking personal growth and falling prey to the manipulative tactics of a charismatic leader. Emily and I emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient, committed to living our lives with newfound wisdom and a determination to never let the shadows of a cult engulf us again. The benevolent cult of the hidden truth may have temporarily ensnared our lives, but it ultimately failed to extinguish the light of reason and love that guided us back to the truth. In a quiet, unassuming town nestled deep within the heart of the countryside, secrets festered like mold in the damp corners of forgotten basements. The town was a place where people whispered of mysterious happenings and unsettling tales that kept them awake at night. None of these tales, however, could match the scary legend of the grave robber. The townsfolk had always known something wasn't right about the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The cemetery had existed for generations, but it was more than just a final resting place for the deceased. It was a place of ominous stories and ominous sightings. For many, it was nothing more than a place they visited during daylight hours, never daring to linger once the sun began to dip below the horizon. The townspeople knew the grave robber's name but dared not utter it aloud for fear that even mentioning it would summon his dark presence. He was known as Elias Thorne, a man with a shadowy past and a reputation that would crack even the hardest of men of those who whispered about him. Elias had a penchant for lurking in the shadows, his gaunt face concealed by a tattered hood and his bony fingers clutching an old rusty spade. The grave robber was no common criminal. He was driven by a morbid obsession, a compulsion to unearth the secrets that lay beneath the ground. He wasn't interested in valuables or riches. Instead, he sought something more sinister. No one could quite understand his motives, but it was clear that he was on a relentless quest to unearth the past. The townspeople were haunted by the unsolved mystery that surrounded Elias Thorne. Whispers of his late-night visits to the cemetery had spread like wildfire. Some claimed to have seen him, his hunched figure silhouetted against the pale moonlight, while others spoke of creepy sounds and restless spirits. But these tales were always hushed, never reported to the authorities, for fear of retribution from the enigmatic grave robber. As the years passed, the mystery deepened. No one could explain why Elias chose to disturb the graves, why he unearthed the dearly departed, and what he did with them. The townspeople grew more and more wary, and some believed that he was conducting a sinister experiment, perhaps searching for a long-lost treasure buried in the depths of the cemetery. One crisp autumn evening, as a harvest moon hung low in the sky, a brave soul decided it was time to uncover the truth about Elias Thorne. Matthew Dawson, a local investigator with a relentless curiosity, had heard enough rumors and could no longer bear the weight of uncertainty. Dawson began researching the history of the cemetery, poring through old records and archives. He discovered that the cemetery was much older than anyone had suspected, dating back to the town's founding in the 18th century. It was said to be the final resting place of a long-forgotten family, the Wraithmoors, whose dark history was entwined with the town's own. As Dawson delved deeper into his research, he unearthed a disturbing connection between Elias Thorne and the Wraithmoors. It was rumored that Elias was a distant relative of the family, a black sheep who had been cast out due to his twisted obsessions. The Wraithmoors had been known for their bizarre rituals, and it was said that they had been practitioners of dark magic. Dawson's investigation led him to conclude that Elias Thorne was seeking something hidden in the depths of the Wraithmoor family crypt. It was believed that the crypt contained not only the remains of the family but also a repository of forbidden knowledge and arcane artifacts. Armed with his newfound knowledge, Dawson decided to confront Elias Thorne on a fateful night when the moon was at its zenith. He knew that he needed to reveal the truth and put an end to the grave robber's reign of terror. Dawson ventured to the cemetery, shrouded in darkness, and approached the Wraithmore family crypt. There he found Elias Thorne hard at work, his spade clinking against the cold stone surface. Dawson watched in horror as Elias uncovered the heavy crypt lid, revealing a chamber filled with ancient tomes and arcane relics. With a voice trembling with fear, Dawson demanded answers from Elias. The grave robber's eyes, hollow and devoid of emotion, met Dawson's gaze. In a voice that sent shivers down Dawson's spine, Elias spoke of his obsession with the Wraithmores, of the dark knowledge hidden within the crypt, and the power he sought to harness. Elias confessed to practicing the same dark arts as his ancestors, believing that the secrets contained within the crypt held the key to ultimate power. He spoke of the restless spirits that he had awakened, trapped within the cemetery's boundaries, and how he intended to use them to achieve his sinister goals. Dawson knew he had to put an end to Elias Thorne's madness. He pleaded with the grave robber to reconsider his actions, to let go of his obsession, but Elias would not be swayed. With a chilling grin, he reached for a cursed amulet from the crypt, a relic said to grant dark powers. As Elias raised the amulet, Dawson lunged forward, knocking it from his grasp. A struggle ensued, with the two men locked in a desperate battle for control of the sinister artifact. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble as the amulet crackled with unholy energy. The amulet's power was unleashed in a cataclysmic burst of energy. The ground shook and the earth itself seemed to rebel against the dark forces at play. The crypt crumbled, burying Elias Thorne beneath its rubble, and sealing the ancient secrets within. Dawson managed to escape the collapsing crypt, but the cemetery had changed forever. The restless spirits that Elias had awakened were finally put to rest, and the town was free from the malevolent presence of the grave robber. The mystery of Elias Thorne was buried along with him, and the old cemetery became a place of quiet reflection once more. The townspeople never spoke of Elias Thorne again. The legend of the grave robber faded into obscurity, and the dark history of the Wraithmores remained a buried secret. But one question lingered in the minds of the townspeople. What had Elias Thorne truly sought in the depths of the cemetery, and had he found it in the end? As the years passed, the memory of the grave robber became a distant echo, a chilling tale told around campfires on dark, moonless nights. The town moved on, but the shadow of Elias Thorne continued to haunt their dreams, a reminder of the darkness that could lurk in even the most unassuming of places. And so the mystery of the grave robber remained, a story that would never be forgotten, a tale of obsession, darkness, and the unearthing of secrets that should have remained buried for all eternity. Years passed, and the town's legend of Elias Thorne began to fade from memory. The once dreaded cemetery was now a tranquil place, its overgrown paths and time-worn headstones standing as silent witnesses to the past. But some residents couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets buried beneath the ground, waiting to be unearthed. One such resident was Sarah Whitman, a young historian with a keen interest in the town's history. Sarah had grown up listening to the stories of Elias Thorne and the Wraithmore family, and she had always been intrigued by the mystery that surrounded them. She was determined to pick up where Matthew Dawson had left off and delve deeper into the enigma that shrouded the cemetery. Sarah began her investigation by poring over the old records, letters, and diaries of the town's founding families. She spent countless hours in the town's dusty archives, uncovering long-forgotten documents that shed light on the Wraithmore family's dark past. She also studied Elias Thorne's genealogy, tracing his bloodline back to its origin. As Sarah delved deeper into her research, she uncovered a startling revelation. The Wraithmore family had indeed practiced dark arts, but it wasn't just dark magic they were involved in. They had been pioneers in the study of alchemy and the transmutation of elements, seeking the elixir of life itself. The family had believed that immortality was within their grasp, and their experiments led to mysterious disappearances and unsettling legends. Sarah's research revealed that Elias Thorne's obsession with the Wraithmores had been driven by a belief that they had discovered the key to eternal life hidden within the crypt. He believed that the crypt's contents held the final piece of the puzzle, the culmination of centuries of experimentation. The Wraithmores' experiments were nothing short of alchemical madness, and the secrets they had sought were both tantalizing and horrifying. Sarah couldn't help but wonder if Elias Thorne had succeeded in his quest, or if he had met a fate worse than death in his relentless pursuit. Sarah was haunted by the story of the cursed amulet that had caused the cataclysmic showdown between Elias Thorne and Matthew Dawson. She decided to revisit the wreckage of the family crypt, hoping to find clues that had been overlooked. Among the rubble and broken stones, she discovered a shard of the amulet, still emanating in dark energy. As she touched the fragment, Sarah felt a rush of unearthly sensations. Visions of the Wraithmore's experiments, their twisted pursuits, and the restless spirits they had awakened flooded her mind. She knew that the shard held a connection to the family's cursed past, and that it held the power to reveal the truth behind Elias Thorne's obsession. Sarah's quest for answers took her deeper into the dark history of the Wraithmores and their experiments. She was able to piece together a chilling account of their alchemical pursuits, their belief in the elixir of life, and the horrifying results of their experiments. It became clear that Elias Thorne had indeed unearthed the crypt's secrets. In his relentless quest for power and immortality, he had discovered the elixir the Wraithmores had sought. He had taken their research to its final terrifying conclusion, and he had achieved a form of eternal existence. However, the price for such a dark triumph had been high. The restless spirits he had awakened, the cataclysmic power of the amulet, and the burden of the Wraithmore's dark legacy had all taken their toll. Elias Thorne had become a prisoner of the very immortality he had sought, a tormented soul bound to the cemetery for all time. Armed with the knowledge of the crypt's secrets, Sarah realized that the only way to free Elias Thorne and the tormented spirits was to reverse the dark alchemical rituals of the Wraithmores. She embarked on a journey to gather the necessary components to create a counter-ritual, one that would restore balance to the cemetery and release the trapped souls. As Sarah worked tirelessly to break the curse, she faced challenges and obstacles that tested her determination and courage. She enlisted the help of local experts in alchemy and ancient rituals, studying forgotten texts and seeking guidance from those who had knowledge of the arcane. After months of research and preparation, the day of the counter-ritual arrived. Sarah, accompanied by a small group of trusted individuals, returned to the cemetery and entered the ruined crypt. They performed the ritual with precision, invoking the power of light and restoration to counteract the darkness that had plagued the Wraithmores for centuries. As the ritual reached its climax, a surge of energy enveloped the crypt, and the restless spirits, including Elias Thorne, were released from their torment. The ground ceased to shake, and the crypt began to repair itself, restoring the tranquility that the cemetery had long lost. With the curse lifted and the spirits at rest, the cemetery was reborn as a place of peace and reflection. The dark chapter in the town's history was finally closed, and the legend of Elias Thorne took on a new significance. Sarah's tireless efforts had not only unveiled the truth behind the grave robber's obsession, but it also brought closure to a long-forgotten story of alchemical folly and the pursuit of immortality. The townspeople, once haunted by their own history, now found solace in the newfound peace that Sarah had brought to the cemetery. The town's residents came to view Elias Thorne in a different light. No longer a malevolent grave robber, he became a figure shrouded in tragedy. His relentless pursuit of immortality had led him down a path of darkness, but in the end it was his quest that had ultimately restored peace to the cemetery. The memory of Elias Thorne, the grave robber, lived on as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of obsession and the consequences of tampering with the unknown. The town would never forget the legend, but they would remember it with a newfound understanding and respect for the mysteries of life and death. In the end, the cemetery stood as a testament to the enduring power of history and the complexity of human nature. The town's past was filled with tales of darkness, but it was also marked by the resilience of those like Sarah Whitman who sought to uncover the truth. The legacy of the grave robber lived on in the form of stories, whispered secrets, and the undying curiosity of those who were drawn to the enigmatic cemetery. And as the years passed, new mysteries and legends would continue to surface, each adding another layer to the town's rich tapestry of history. So the tale of the grave robber Elias Thorne remained a haunting mystery, a story of obsession, redemption, and the unending quest to unravel the secrets. As the sun dipped below the horizon, its final rays painted the sky in shades of crimson and violet. The dense forest surrounding us whispered secrets of the unknown, and the cabin, a remote sanctuary hidden deep within the woods, seemed to beckon with an otherworldly allure. Our group of friends, Sarah, Alex, Mark, Lisa, and Eric, had chosen this cabin for a weekend retreat, ignorant of the eerie tale it held. Sarah, the intrepid explorer of our group, had stumbled upon the listing while seeking an escape from our daily lives. The cabin was a 2-story structure, its weathered facade hinting at the stories etched into its very wood. Little did we know this weekend would etch its own chapter into the cabin's history. The first night passed relatively uneventfully. We arrived with excitement, unpacked, and settled into the cozy interior of the cabin. The fireplace crackled with warmth, dispelling the chill that clung to the air. We enjoyed a hearty meal, shared laughter, and played card games long into the night. The cabin embraced us with its charm, and the unsettling feeling that had loomed on our arrival seemed to ebb away. The following day, we decided to explore the forest, its dense trees looming like ancient sentinels. The air was cool. The leaves rustled in the breeze, and the beauty of nature surrounded us. It felt like an ideal escape from the urban chaos we left behind. As we ventured deeper into the forest, a feeling of unease settled upon us. The silence was profound, and the trees with their gnarled branches seemed to close in around us. Lisa, usually the calm and collected one, leaned over to Mark and whispered, "Do you feel that? It's like the forest is watching us." Mark, typically the skeptic of the group, couldn't shake the eerie atmosphere either. The woods seemed to have a life of their own, secrets that they guarded with an ironclad silence. That evening, as we gathered around the dining table, we heard it for the first time. A faint, ghostly whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. It was as if the very wood and stone were infused with ancient tales. An uneasy shiver rippled through us, and we exchanged concerned glances. Eric, the one with an insatiable curiosity, couldn't resist the urge to investigate the source of the sound. The whisper seemed to guide him to a small locked room within the cabin. Layers of dust veiled the forgotten chamber, and as he swung open the door, he discovered an old journal amidst the relics of the past. The journal had aged, its pages yellowed and brittle. It belonged to a previous inhabitant of the cabin, and the entries told a chilling story. The author wrote of strange occurrences, of whispers in the night, shadows that moved of their own volition, and a final entry, a desperate plea for help. We gathered around as Eric read the journal aloud, and though we tried to dismiss it as the ramblings of a tormented mind, the cabin's unsettling atmosphere clung to us like a second skin. That night, as we retired to our beds, strange occurrences commenced once again. The whispers grew louder, and eerie shadows danced upon the walls. I was the first to see it. A shadowy figure, human-like but not quite, moved slowly and menacingly across the room. I gasped, awakening the others. Terrified, we huddled together in the living room, and our fear escalated with each chilling sound and movement. It was then we decided that this place was no longer safe, and we needed to leave at first light. Morning came, but the cabin had other plans. The front door, which had welcomed us so willingly, refused to open. Panic set in as anguished cries emanated from the cabin's very walls. We were trapped, our fate seemingly sealed. Desperation led us to the attic, where we discovered an old dusty Ouija board. It was a relic of the past, a forgotten game, and its presence heightened the eerie atmosphere. It felt like our last hope, our final attempt to communicate with whatever entity had ensnared us. Placing our hands on the planchette, it began to move on its own, spelling out words in response to our questions. The spirit identified itself as the restless soul of the man who had penned the journal. He had been consumed by a dark force within the cabin and needed our help to escape. We hesitated, but ultimately agreed to assist the spirit, hoping that by doing so we could free ourselves from the cabin's sinister grip. We followed the spirit's guidance, which led us to the cellar. There, he claimed, was the source of the sinister, an old locked chest containing the key to our release. As we found the chest and returned to the attic, the cabin's grasp intensified. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the whispers evolved into a cacophony of haunting voices. We were undeterred, determined to complete the ritual that would release us from this nightmare. Finally, the oppressive force was expelled, and the cabin descended into an eerie silence. The front door swung open as if granting us passage to freedom. We fled without looking back, leaving behind the haunted cabin, its darkness expelled at last. As we drove away, we couldn't help but cast one final anxious look back at the cabin. It stood serene and innocent in the warm sunlight, its history hidden beneath the wooden facade, as if the evil had never taken root. We returned to the city, forever marked by our weekend in the woods. The memory of the cabin would stay with us, a constant reminder that some places, no matter how charming, should remain untouched by human curiosity. We left the cabin to the mysteries of the forest, hoping that it would remain dormant, at least for another generation. The forest of whispering shadows remained an enigmatic guardian of the cabin's history, and the whispering shadows whispered secrets to those who dared to listen. It was a tale we'd carry with us, a story of survival against the unknown, a memory of a weekend none of us would ever forget. The memories of our haunting weekend at the Whispering Shadows cabin remained etched in our minds long after we returned to the familiarity of city life. We tried to move forward, but the eerie events of that retreat were not so easily forgotten. It was as if the cabin's history had left an indelible mark on our souls, and as time passed, that mark only grew more pronounced. Sarah, the one who had originally found the cabin, bore the burden of that experience more than anyone else. She couldn't let go of the feeling that something remained unresolved, a story left incomplete. Her determination to unveil the cabin's dark history became an obsession, a mission to confront her own fears and put an end to the secrets that haunted that secluded place. As she delved deeper into the cabin's history, Sarah uncovered a trail of stories and tragedies that had unfolded over the years. The cabin had changed hands multiple times, each owner leaving behind tales of unexplainable occurrences and bizarre accidents. The most recent owner, a reclusive scholar of the occult, had mysteriously vanished, leaving behind an unfinished manuscript that hinted at a mysterious presence residing in the cabin. The book contained cryptic rituals meant to bind the being, but it was incomplete, leaving the entity unrestrained. Sarah became convinced that the key to ending the cabin's curse lay in completing the ritual and sealing the entity. Her determination was unwavering, and she believed that our group, bound by the memories of that fateful weekend, owed it to the cabin's lost souls and to future visitors to confront our fears and put an end to the malevolence. Despite the reservations of the group, we agreed to return to the Whispering Shadows cabin, driven by a mixture of curiosity, determination, and lingering dread. The closer we got to our destination, the more the unease we had felt before seemed to wrap itself around us once more. As we arrived at the cabin, an eerie silence greeted us, as if the forest itself held its breath. The cabin stood before us, its history shrouded in shadows, and it seemed to welcome us back with an unsettling sense of anticipation. We crossed its threshold not as unsuspecting visitors, but as individuals haunted by memories we couldn't forget. The moment we entered, the whispers began anew, soft and forlorn, as though the cabin itself yearned for release. We descended into the cellar, the incomplete manuscript in hand, determined to complete the ritual that had eluded its former owner. As we followed the ritual steps, the cabin seemed to resist. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the whispers grew more insistent. The atmosphere became tense and threatening, as though the cabin itself fought to protect the entity that dwelled within. But we pressed on, united by our shared goal, determined to complete the ritual and bring an end to the cabin's terror. The final steps of the incantation were heavy with foreboding, and the air crackled with an unseen force. As the last words left our lips, the cabin let out a chilling scream, its walls seemingly protesting the expulsion of the dark presence. In that moment, the cabin itself seemed to wither and age, as if the very life force that had sustained it was being drained away. We left the cabin for the final time, the forest surrounding it now echoing with a newfound stillness. The cabin had changed. Its once haunting presence had lost its malevolence, and it stood silent and unassuming in the light of day. As we departed, we couldn't help but cast one final apprehensive look at the cabin. It stood there, serene and tranquil, its history hidden beneath the wooden facade, as if the darkness had never existed. Returning to the city, the memories of our haunted retreat began to lose their sharp edges, but they remained a part of us, forever etched into our shared history. The Whispering Shadows cabin had lost its ominous reputation, and we left it to the secrets of the forest, with the hope that it would remain undisturbed for years to come. The Whispering Shadows forest continued to whisper its tales, but the cabin had become just another story, an echo of the past. It was a reminder that some places held secrets that were better left undisturbed. The night shift was always my least favorite part of the job. The empty hallways of St. Martin's retirement home seemed to echo with the ghostly memories of its inhabitants. The corridors played tricks on my tired eyes, and the creaks and groans of the old building were unnerving. But it was a paycheck and I had bills to pay. As the new night nurse on duty, I was responsible for the well-being of the elderly residents during the darkest hours. Most of them slept through the night, but a few would occasionally need my assistance. The isolation of the night shift only heightened my unease. It was as if the building itself was haunted by the shadows of the past. The first few weeks were relatively uneventful, except for the occasional patient needing assistance to the bathroom or a glass of water. But as the nights passed, I began to notice peculiar things. The residents, particularly the ones with dementia, would sometimes speak in hushed tones to no one in particular. They claimed to see figures standing at the foot of their beds or hear distant whispers. I tried to reassure them, chalking it up to their old age and fragile mental states. But deep down, their stories sent a cold feeling down my spine. And then there was Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson was an elderly woman who lived in room 212. She was sharp for her age, a former librarian who still possessed a wealth of knowledge. But as the weeks went by, I noticed she became increasingly agitated during my shifts. One night as I entered her room to check on her, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide with fear as she whispered, "They're watching. Don't you see them, dear? They're always there." I followed her gaze, but there was nothing to see. The room was empty, save for the soft glow of the nightlight. I tried to soothe her, telling her it was just her imagination. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As days turned into weeks, I noticed a pattern. The residents' restlessness seemed to increase with each passing night. They would talk of shadowy figures, distant voices, and faces in the windows. I began to doubt my own sanity, wondering if the isolation and dark atmosphere of the retirement home were playing tricks on my mind. One night, as I made my rounds, I heard a faint sound coming from the basement. It was a soft, melodic hum that made my blood freeze. I decided to investigate, my curiosity getting the best of me. I descended the creaky stairs, and as I reached the bottom, the humming grew louder. The basement was a labyrinthine maze of storage rooms and long-forgotten furniture. The source of the humming seemed to be coming from one of the rooms at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and a pale, eerie light seeped through the crack. As I pushed the door open, I was met with a scene that froze me in my tracks. In the center of the room, a group of elderly residents sat in a circle, their faces twisted with a strange mix of fear and ecstasy. They were chanting in a language I couldn't comprehend, their voices rising and falling in an unsettling rhythm. In the center of the circle was Mrs. Henderson. Her eyes rolled back in her head, her frail body swaying to the haunting melody. My heart raced as I watched the bizarre spectacle unfold before me. I had no idea what I was witnessing, but it felt like something out of a nightmare. I couldn't move, couldn't speak as the chanting continued. It was as if time had stopped, and I was trapped in this surreal, otherworldly moment. I finally mustered the courage to step back and quietly close the door, retreating to the safety of the narrow corridor. My mind raced with questions and fear. What were they doing? What was the purpose of that strange ritual? I decided to consult my supervisor in the morning, hoping for an explanation. The morning couldn't come soon enough. I rushed to my supervisor's office, my heart pounding with anxiety. I explained what I had witnessed in the basement, expecting shock and disbelief. But to my surprise, my supervisor's face remained unnervingly calm. "That's nothing to worry about," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Sometimes they just do strange things at night. It's part of their condition." I tried to protest, to convey the urgency of the situation, but he brushed it off as the ramblings of confused elderly residents. I couldn't help but feel as though there was more to the story than he was letting on. That night, I couldn't get the image of the basement ritual out of my mind. I felt a growing sense of unease, a gnawing fear that there was something sinister lurking in the shadows of St. Martin's retirement home. As I made my rounds that evening, I couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. The residents seemed more restless than ever, their eyes darting around as if they were constantly on edge. It was as if the retirement home had become a pressure cooker ready to burst at any moment. And then it happened. As I entered Mrs. Henderson's room, I found her lying in bed, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed a trembling finger towards the window, her voice barely more than a whisper. "They're here," she said, her voice quivering. "The watchers in the night. They're waiting for you." I turned to look out the window, half expecting to see some malevolent presence lurking in the darkness. But there was nothing. Just the same empty courtyard and the distant glow of streetlights. I tried to calm Mrs. Henderson, but her fear was palpable. She clutched my arm and begged me not to leave her alone. I decided to stay with her, hoping to provide some comfort in the face of her overwhelming terror. As the night wore on, Mrs. Henderson's fear only intensified. She spoke of the watchers in the night, of the things they had seen and the terrible secrets they held. It was a chilling narrative that creeped me out. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered and dimmed, casting mysterious shadows on the walls. Mrs. Henderson's grip on my arm tightened, and she gasped in terror. I turned to look at the window, and that's when I saw them. Figures, dark and indistinct, stood outside the window. They were tall and featureless, their outlines shifting and swaying in the night breeze. Mrs. Henderson's eyes were locked onto them, her face a mask of pure horror. I tried to pull the curtains shut to block out the nightmarish figures, but they seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as if they were ethereal and insubstantial. I was overcome with a sense of dread, a feeling that we were being watched by something vicious and beyond our understanding. Mrs. Henderson's frail voice broke the silence, her words laced with terror. "They're the watchers in the night. They've been waiting for you, waiting for your turn." I couldn't bear to look at those shadowy figures any longer. I grabbed Mrs. Henderson, her trembling body in my arms, and rushed out of the room. As I made my way down the hallway, I noticed that the other residents were also in a state of fear and agitation. They spoke of the watchers in the night, of their long-awaited arrival. The retirement home had descended into chaos. Residents roamed the corridors in a daze, their voices filled with terror and confusion. It was as if a sinister force had descended upon the building, and there was no escape from its grasp. I desperately tried to call for help, but the phone lines were dead, and the lights continued to flicker, casting weird, dancing shadows on the walls. The building seemed to groan and creak, as if it were a living, breathing entity. As I led Mrs. Henderson down the stairwell, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being pursued. The air was thick with an oppressive sense of dread, and the dark figures seemed to be closing in on us. Finally, we reached the ground floor, but the entrance seemed impossibly far away. The retirement home had become a nightmarish labyrinth, and we were trapped in its web of fear and uncertainty. Just as we reached the entrance, I heard a soft, melodic hum, the same creepy tune that I had heard in the basement. I turned to look behind us, and the figures were there, their shadowy forms looming in the darkness. They were closing in, their presence suffocating and malicious. I pushed the heavy double doors open, the night air rushing in to greet us. As I stepped out into the courtyard, I felt a strange sensation, as if the ground beneath me was shifting and undulating. I turned to look back at the retirement home, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. The building seemed to contort and twist, its windows transforming into gaping, hollow eyes that stared out at me with an otherworldly malevolence. The retirement home had become a nightmarish entity, a living, breathing abomination that defied all reason and logic. Mrs. Henderson's voice broke through my shock, her trembling words a haunting lament. "They've been waiting for you, waiting for your turn." I turned and fled into the night, leaving the retirement home and its horrors behind. The night air was cold and unforgiving, and the darkness seemed to stretch on into eternity. As I stumbled through the streets, I couldn't help but wonder what had become of the residents and the sinister figures that had pursued us. I was haunted by the memory of the retirement home, a place where the boundaries between reality and nightmare had blurred and twisted. The night shift had turned into a night of terror, a night that would forever haunt my dreams. The retirement home and its dark secrets were now a part of me, an unending nightmare that I could never escape. And as I walked through the cold, unforgiving darkness, I couldn't help but wonder if the retirement home was still there, waiting for its next victim, waiting for my turn to come. Working the night shift in a small research facility was always a creepy experience. The building was situated on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense forest and far from the comforting glow of the city lights. As a laboratory assistant, I had grown used to the solitude of the night, but one particular night would forever change the way I viewed the facility. My shift began like any other. The research facility specialized in studying rare plants and their potential medicinal properties. Most nights, the silence was broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning system and the distant chirping of crickets. But that night was different. As I made my rounds, checking on the various experiments, I noticed something odd. In one of the isolated containment chambers, a peculiar plant had grown much larger than it should have. It was a rare species known as luminaris, with phosphorescent leaves that emitted a soft, eerie glow. But this plant had exceeded its normal size and now filled the chamber. I approached the containment chamber, my curiosity piqued. The soft green glow of the luminaris leaves cast a surreal, almost otherworldly light on the surroundings. I reached out to touch the leaves, but before my fingers could make contact, a voice behind me said, "Don't touch it." Startled, I spun around to see Dr. Eleanor Weber, the head researcher. She was known for her reclusive nature and rarely ventured into the facility during the night. Her face was pale, and her eyes held a mixture of fear and fascination. "What's going on, Dr. Weber?" I asked, bewildered by the strange occurrence. "Why has this plant grown so large?" She didn't answer immediately, her eyes fixed on the luminaris. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's not just the size, it's the rate of growth. I've never seen anything like it." We both watched in silence as the luminaris continued to expand, its leaves pulsating with a strange light. Dr. Weber's fear was palpable, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. As we left the containment chamber, she explained that the luminaris had been a subject of intense research for years. Its unique properties made it a potential game-changer in the pharmaceutical industry. But its cultivation was notoriously difficult, with growth rates measured in millimeters over months, not inches and hours. Dr. Weber believed that something extraordinary had occurred, something beyond our comprehension. She was determined to find answers, and as the night progressed, we delved deeper into the anomaly. Our investigation led us to the main research lab where the luminaris seeds were stored. To our shock, the seeds had begun to germinate, their tiny shoots pushing through the soil. It was as if an invisible force was propelling their growth. Dr. Weber took a sample of the anomalous plant, and we returned to her office to examine it under the microscope. What we discovered was beyond belief. The plant cells showed signs of accelerated growth, as if they had been subjected to some unknown force. As the night wore on, we became increasingly absorbed in our research, forgetting about the time. The luminaris anomaly was unlike anything we had ever seen, and it held a dark, magnetic allure. At around 3 a.m., while we were engrossed in our research, a low, guttural sound echoed through the facility. Dr. Weber and I exchanged worried glances. The sound was unnatural, a discordant blend of whispers and growls. We decided to investigate, following the sound to its source. It led us to a remote section of the facility that housed the staff quarters. As we approached, the strange noises grew louder and more unsettling. It was as if the building itself was alive with a sinister presence. Inside one of the quarters, we discovered a horrifying scene. The room had been torn apart, furniture scattered, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. At the center of the room was the facility's janitor, Mr. Ramirez. He was huddled in a corner, his eyes vacant, and he muttered incoherently. Dr. Weber tried to speak to him, to understand what had happened, but Mr. Ramirez's words were a nonsensical jumble. He kept repeating the word growth over and over. We called for security and Mr. Ramirez was escorted from the facility. But the sense of dread remained. The mysterious anomaly of the luminaris and the strange events of the night had left us all deeply unnerved. We returned to the main lab, determined to find answers. As we examined the luminaris sample, Dr. Weber made a chilling discovery. The plant cells were mutating, merging with other organisms in ways that defied the laws of nature. The more we delved into the research, the more we realized that we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding. Dr. Weber's fascination had given way to fear, and I couldn't help but feel that we had stumbled upon something malevolent. We worked through the night, our research becoming increasingly frantic as the luminaries continued to grow and mutate. The sounds that had plagued us earlier had returned, filling the facility with a sense of foreboding. At around 4 a.m., as we reached a breakthrough in our research, a blinding flash of light filled the lab. We shielded our eyes, stumbling back in shock. When the light subsided, we were met with an astonishing sight. The luminaris had grown to an enormous size, its leaves stretching out like dark, outstretched hands. It pulsed with a green light, filling the lab with an otherworldly glow. Dr. Weber and I exchanged horrified glances. The luminaris had become a monstrous, mutated entity, its presence dominating the room. It was as if it had absorbed the very essence of the facility. We tried to retreat to escape the nightmarish scene, but the door to the lab had become sealed shut. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped with the abomination. The luminaris leaves seemed to reach out, as if they had a mind of their own. We fought to break free, our desperate struggles doing little against the overwhelming power of the luminaris. The plant seemed to pulse with malevolence, its unnatural growth spiraling out of control. As the luminaris closed in, the facility itself seemed to come alive, the walls shifting and contorting as if they were part of some grotesque living organism. The guttural sounds grew louder, filling the air with a cacophony of whispers and growls. Dr. Weber and I clung to each other, our fear mounting as the monstrous plant closed in. It was as if we had become part of a grotesque experiment, one that defied all logic and reason. The luminaris leaves enveloped us, their scary light casting us into a surreal, nightmarish world. It was a place where the boundaries between reality and nightmare had blurred, a place where the laws of nature were bent and twisted. And as the luminaries consumed us, I couldn't help but wonder if the plant had become a doorway to a world beyond our comprehension, a world of darkness and malevolence. It was a world that had claimed us, a world that we would never escape. The night shift had become a night of horror, a night that would forever haunt my dreams. Working the night shift at an old small-town museum had always been a strange and solitary experience. The hallways were lined with dusty exhibits, their silhouettes casting long, unsettling shadows. On most nights, the silence of the museum was broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden floors and the distant hum of a malfunctioning air conditioning system. But one night, as I soon discovered, held something far more sinister beneath its seemingly mundane surface. I had been the night security guard at the Hamilton Historical Museum for years, tasked with keeping watch over the priceless artifacts and ensuring the security of the building. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and the quiet nights allowed me time to work on my novel. One particular evening, as I settled into the monotonous routine of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The usual stillness of the museum felt different. I checked the locks on the main entrance, but they were secure. I dismissed the feeling as mere paranoia, a side effect of the solitude of the night. As I made my rounds through the museum, my flashlight beam danced over the glass display cases, revealing a treasure trove of antiques and relics. Ancient weapons, old photographs, and delicate porcelain figurines seemed to watch me as I passed. I couldn't help but feel that the artifacts held stories of their own, secrets that the passage of time had failed to erase. One exhibit in particular drew my attention. It was a display of Victorian-era dolls, their porcelain faces frozen in a lifelike expression. The dolls had always unnerved me, and I never lingered near them for long. However, on this night I noticed something unusual. One of the dolls had shifted position, its porcelain head now turned to face me. I approached the display, my heart pounding. I had been the only person in the museum all night, and I was certain I had locked up securely. But there it was, the doll, its tiny, lifeless eyes seemingly following my every move. I reached out to examine the doll, my fingers trembling. As my hand brushed against the cold porcelain, I noticed a faint scratching sound coming from within the exhibit. I swung my flashlight around, but there was nothing to explain the noise. My unease grew as I continued my rounds, the sensation of being watched lingering at the edge of my consciousness. The more I investigated, the more unsettling discoveries I made. In the natural history section, the stuffed animals seemed to have shifted position, their glassy eyes appearing more animated than usual. I dismissed it as a trick of the light and a result of my imagination. However, the creeping feeling of being watched never left me. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. The museum, once a place of quiet solace, had become a source of unrelenting paranoia. The night wore on and I returned to my desk in the security office to catch up on some writing. I had always been an aspiring novelist, and the quiet nights at the museum provided the perfect backdrop for inspiration. But that night the words eluded me. I couldn't focus, my attention continually drawn to the ambiance of the museum. At around 2 a.m., as I sat staring at a blank page, the museum's old grandfather clock chimed loudly from the adjacent hallway. The sudden, unexpected sound startled me. I got up and approached the clock, wondering how it could have possibly chimed on its own. It was a mechanical clock, not connected to any electrical system. As I examined the clock's intricate gears, the scratching sound from earlier returned. It was now louder, more insistent. I followed the noise down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The source of the scratching was coming from a small, nondescript door that led to the basement. The door, typically locked at night, was now slightly ajar. I couldn't explain how the door had come open, but my sense of unease deepened. With cautious trepidation, I pushed the door open and descended the creaky stairs into the dark basement. The overhead light was dim, casting long, mystic shadows on the walls. The scratching sound grew louder as I descended further into the basement. It was coming from behind an old, dusty curtain that separated a storage area from the rest of the basement. I approached the curtain and cautiously pulled it aside. What I saw made me grasp for air. Huddled in a corner was a homeless man, his eyes wide with fear, his clothes tattered and filthy. He clutched a small, worn-out notebook and scribbled furiously in it with a shaky hand. The room smelled of decay and desperation. I took a step back, my mind racing with questions. How had he entered the basement, and why was he here in the museum at this hour? The homeless man appeared to be incoherent, muttering to himself as he continued to write in his notebook. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man's head snapped up and his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my blood turn cold. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They're always coming, and I have to document it. You mustn't let them in." I couldn't make sense of his words, and the feeling of unease deepened. I took a step closer, trying to offer help, but the man recoiled, his eyes filled with terror. "They're watching," he said, his voice growing louder. "You can't trust anyone, not even yourself." Before I could respond, he bolted from the corner and disappeared into the darkness of the basement. I called out to him, but he was gone, leaving behind his notebook, open on the ground. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up the notebook, my hands trembling. The pages were filled with rambling, cryptic notes, sketches of strange symbols, and frantic scribbles about being watched and the need to document everything. It was a chaotic, nightmarish diary of someone who had lost touch with reality. I had a million questions, but no answers. Who was this man? And what had brought him to the museum? What had he meant by, "they're coming"? As the night dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The homeless man's ominous warning echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the museum than met the eye. The sense of unease had escalated into a full-blown paranoia. Around 3 a.m., I made my way back to the security office, intending to call the authorities about the intruder. But the moment I picked up the phone, a chilling sound filled the room. A soft, melodic hum that seemed to emanate from the museum itself. I turned to look out into the hallway, and there, standing in the dim light, was a group of people. They were dressed in black, their faces obscured by masks. They moved silently, in perfect unison, as if they were part of some ritual. My heart raced as I watched the bizarre spectacle unfold. The group of masked figures moved in a circular formation, their movements fluid and graceful. It was a surreal, otherworldly performance. I couldn't explain what I was witnessing, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the haunting scene. The humming sound grew louder, filling the air with a hypnotic melody. And then, with a sudden jerky movement, the group of figures raised their arms in unison and pointed toward me. The sight sent a jolt of terror through my body, and I stumbled back, my pulse racing. I dropped the phone and fumbled for the door to the security office, desperate to escape the nightmarish scene. But the door was stuck and I couldn't get it open. The humming sound grew louder and the masked figures continued to point in my direction. I was trapped, surrounded by the enigmatic performance. The sense of dread deepened as I realized that the homeless man's warning had come true. I was being watched, and I had no way to escape. As the figures closed in, their masks devoid of expression, I couldn't help but wonder what their intentions were and what secrets the museum held. The night shift had taken a surreal, nightmarish turn, and I was left with an overwhelming sense of dread, my every instinct screaming at me to run, to escape the bizarre, sinister spectacle unfolding before my eyes. But the figures advanced, their hands reaching out, and the world around me began to warp and distort. It was as if reality itself had become unhinged, and I was trapped in a waking nightmare, a place where the boundaries between the mundane and the inexplicable had blurred and twisted. And as the figures closed in, their masks a chilling mask of indifference, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever escape the enigmatic grip of the night shift, if I would ever uncover the truth behind the museum's eerie and unsettling mysteries. The chill of autumn had settled into our small college town, and with it came the promise of new beginnings. I was excited to start my freshman year at Crestwood University, eager to make friends and explore the world beyond my hometown. Little did I know that the darkest, most unsettling chapter of my life was about to unfold within the walls of my dormitory. My roommate Mark seemed like an ordinary guy at first. He was friendly, always willing to help with my heavy bags during move-in day, and he even offered to share his stash of snacks. We hit it off quickly, bonding over our shared love of horror movies and late-night gaming sessions. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. As the weeks passed, I began to notice odd things about Mark. He was a night owl, staying up until the early hours of the morning. I'd often wake to find him hunched over his desk, staring at his computer screen with an intensity that creeped me out. I tried not to think too much of it, chalking it up to his eccentric study habits. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. Mark had left his laptop open and I couldn't resist taking a peek. What I saw made my blood run cold. His screen was filled with newspaper articles and photographs of missing persons, each one carefully cataloged with notes. My heart raced as I realized the extent of his obsession. "Mark, what is all of this?" I asked, my voice trembling as I confronted him about the disturbing discovery. He turned to face me, his eyes devoid of emotion. "Just a hobby," he replied casually, as if discussing the weather. "I'm interested in unsolved mysteries, that's all." But it wasn't just the obsession with missing persons that unnerved me. Mark's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would disappear for days on end, claiming he was visiting his family or taking impromptu trips. Whenever he returned, he'd bring back strange, unmarked packages that he stashed in the depths of our closet. I tried to distance myself from Mark, spending more time with my new friends on campus, but he always managed to pull me back into his world. He'd invite me to movie nights or offer me his snacks, and I'd find myself unable to refuse. It was as though he had some strange power over me, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. One evening after a particularly long gaming session, I couldn't hold back my questions any longer. "Mark, what are those packages you keep bringing back? And why do you always leave in the middle of the night?" He grinned a chilling, predatory smile. "I have a secret," he whispered, his voice laced with menace. "But I can't tell you just yet. You'll find out soon enough." I should have run then, fled from the darkness that seemed to envelop my roommate. But fear held me captive, and I couldn't tear myself away from the web he'd woven around me. Weeks turned into months, and the campus buzzed with rumors of missing students. It was as if our peaceful college town had become a breeding ground for tragedy. I couldn't help but connect the dots, wondering if Mark's obsession with missing persons had taken a sinister turn. One night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I heard the creaking of our closet door. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror as Mark emerged, carrying one of the mysterious packages. He didn't notice me, too consumed by whatever dark purpose drove him. I watched in terror as he unwrapped the package, revealing a collection of photographs, all of them featuring me. Each image had been taken without my knowledge, capturing intimate moments from my life. Fear gripped me as I realized that I was at the center of his obsession. "Mark, what the hell is this?" I screamed, my voice trembling with rage and fear. He turned to face me, his eyes filled with a manic intensity. "You see, I have a secret and you're a part of it," he hissed. I knew I had to escape, to run as far away from Mark as possible. I leaped out of bed and bolted for the door, but he was faster, tackling me to the ground. We grappled on the floor, my fear-fueled strength matching his desperation. As we struggled, Mark's words spilled out in a frenzied confession. He had been responsible for the disappearances on campus, luring unsuspecting students into his twisted web. He had been studying me, preparing for the day when I would become his next victim. With every ounce of strength, I managed to break free from his grip and make a run for it. I dashed out of the room, the chilling echo of his maniacal laughter following me down the dormitory hallway. My mind raced as I fled, knowing that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. I reached the campus security office, breathless and covered in bruises. They took my statement and launched an immediate search for Mark. As they combed through his room, they discovered a chilling array of evidence, including photographs and personal items belonging to his victims. Mark was apprehended, and the truth of his dark secret was laid bare for all to see. He had been living a double life, posing as an ordinary college student while hiding a sinister obsession with abducting and tormenting his fellow classmates. In the aftermath, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had taken hold of me. The scars, both physical and emotional, ran deep, a constant reminder of the horrors I had narrowly escaped. Crestwood University would never be the same, and neither would I. As the seasons changed and the years passed, I found solace in therapy and the support of my friends and family. Mark was locked away, never to harm another soul, but the nightmares of that fateful year would haunt me forever. The darkness that had once resided within my own dormitory had been exposed, but the true nature of Mark's secret would forever remain a chilling mystery, one that I hoped would fade into obscurity, never to be unearthed again. But the story didn't end with Mark's capture. As the investigation deepened, the authorities discovered a network of hidden chambers beneath our dormitory, each one containing evidence of Mark's depraved activities. The underground lair was a chilling maze of photographs, journals, and mementos, each one linked to a different victim. It became clear that Mark had been operating in secret for years, selecting his victims with disturbing precision. He had meticulously documented their lives, collecting information and mementos that allowed him to assume their identities. It was a nightmare beyond comprehension, a secret so dark and twisted that it defied explanation. The campus was in shock, and the media descended upon Crestwood University, hungry for every detail of the horrifying discovery. Students and their families demanded answers, and the university was forced to confront the unthinkable truth that had festered beneath their very noses. As the investigation continued, more victims were identified, and the full scope of Mark's crimes became clear. Families were reunited with their missing loved ones, but the scars of their ordeals ran deep. Crestwood University would never fully recover from the stain of Mark's actions, and the dormitory where the nightmare had unfolded was forever tainted. In the years that followed, I tried to move on with my life, but the memories of that fateful year continued to haunt me. I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, of a darkness that lingered in the corners of my mind. The nightmares persisted, a relentless reminder of the horror I had endured. As I walked the halls of Crestwood University, I couldn't help but wonder how many other secrets lay hidden beneath the surface, how many other nightmares were waiting to be uncovered. The campus had been forever changed by the darkness that had taken root within its walls, a darkness that had nearly claimed me as its victim. The legacy of Mark's dark secret would cast a long shadow over Crestwood University, a chilling reminder that even in the most ordinary of places, the most sinister of secrets could be lurking, waiting to be revealed. And so, as I looked out at the campus that had once been a place of promise and hope, I couldn't help but wonder if the darkness that had consumed Mark might one day resurface, casting its sinister shadow once again. I had always thought of myself as someone who could handle life's twists and turns with ease, After all, I had weathered my fair share of ups and downs over the years. But nothing could have prepared me for the peculiar turn my life would take when I moved in with my new roommate, Alex. It was a sweltering summer day when I first met Alex. I'd been searching for a roommate to share the rent of my small 2-bedroom apartment, and he had responded to my online ad. We met at a nearby cafe, and our initial conversation was pleasant enough. Alex was a tall, wiry man in his early 30s, with a mop of unruly brown hair and an awkward but endearing smile. We quickly agreed to become roommates. His rent payment would be a lifesaver for me, and Alex assured me that he was quiet and kept to himself, which sounded like a dream come true for a roommate. Little did I know that his reserved demeanor would soon unravel into a series of bizarre and unsettling behaviors. The first sign that something was amiss came in the form of late-night noises. At first, I chalked it up to the usual settling sounds of an old apartment building. But as the weeks went by, the noises became more distinct and scary. I would hear faint whispers and soft thumps in the middle of the night, as if Alex were engaged in some mysterious nocturnal activity. One night, unable to ignore it any longer, I ventured out of my room to investigate. I found Alex sitting cross-legged in the living room, surrounded by an array of candles. He was hunched over a worn, leather-bound book, muttering incantations in a language I couldn't recognize. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and filled with an intensity that made my blood freeze. "Alex, what are you doing?" I stammered, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and confusion. He looked up at me, his eyes momentarily vacant, before a twisted smile crept across his face. "Just some late-night reading," he replied cryptically before closing the book and extinguishing the candles. I returned to my room, my heart pounding in my chest. The encounter had left me deeply unsettled, but I convinced myself that it was nothing more than an eccentric habit, a quirk that I could tolerate in a roommate. As the weeks turned into months, Alex's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would spend hours locked in his room, and when he emerged, he would be carrying strange items, a taxidermy crow, an antique dagger, and even a collection of unmarked vials filled with murky liquids. I had no idea what he was doing with these items, but it was clear that he was immersed in some bizarre and unsettling hobby. One evening, I returned home from work to find our living room transformed into a makeshift altar. Candles, incense, and strange symbols were scattered across the floor. Alex was kneeling at the center, his eyes closed in what appeared to be deep meditation. "Alex, what is all of this?" I demanded, my frustration and anxiety boiling over. He opened his eyes slowly, gazing at me with a scary calmness. "I'm pursuing a higher purpose," he replied, his voice carrying an otherworldly quality. "I've found a path to enlightenment, and I must follow it." I couldn't make sense of his cryptic words, and a sense of dread settled over me. It was as if Alex had ventured into a world of his own, one that was steeped in mysticism and darkness. I couldn't fathom what had led him down this path or how it had taken hold of him so completely. As the days turned into weeks, I became increasingly isolated in my own home. Alex's presence loomed over me like a dark cloud, and I couldn't escape the feeling that he was hiding something far more sinister than his eccentric hobbies. It was as though a wall had been erected between us, and I was left on the outside, trying to peer in and make sense of the madness that had consumed my roommate. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to investigate further. I carefully picked the lock to Alex's room and ventured inside. What I discovered would haunt me for the rest of my days. The walls of his room were covered in intricate symbols, drawn in what appeared to be blood. Shelves were lined with ancient-looking books, each one filled with cryptic texts and illustrations of grotesque creatures. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, and in the center of the room I found a circle etched into the floor, surrounded by candles and adorned with disturbing symbols. As I inspected the room, I stumbled upon a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside, I found a collection of journals, each one filled with Alex's ramblings and accounts of his bizarre experiences. He wrote of visions of encounters with entities from other realms, and of a growing obsession with the occult. My heart raced as I realized the depth of Alex's descent into madness. It was clear that he had become entangled in a world of dark magic and forbidden knowledge, and there was no telling where it would lead him, or what it might mean for me. Terrified and unsure of what to do, I confronted Alex about what I had discovered. His reaction was unlike anything I could have anticipated. He laughed, a chilling, mirthless laugh. "You've stumbled upon the truth, my friend," he said, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. "I've unlocked the secrets of the universe, and there's no turning back." I knew then that I had to escape, to flee from the madness that had consumed my roommate. I packed my belongings hastily and made plans to move out. But as I prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that Alex's dark obsession would follow me, that I had become entangled in a web of darkness that would never let me go. As I settled into my new apartment, far away from the nightmare of my old life, I couldn't help but wonder what had become of Alex. Had his obsession with the occult consumed him completely, or had he found some semblance of peace? I would never know the answers, but the memory of those eerie nights in our shared apartment would haunt me forever. I had learned a valuable lesson about the darkness that can lurk within the hearts and minds of those we think we know. It was a lesson that would stay with me, a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling and inexplicable mysteries can be found closer to home than we ever imagined. In the years that followed, I tried to put the nightmare of my former roommate behind me, to move on with my life and leave the darkness that had consumed him far behind. But I couldn't escape the feeling that some part of that darkness had latched onto me, that I had become a part of a story that was far from over. And so, as I looked out at the world, I couldn't help but wonder how many other individuals were hiding their own dark secrets, how many others were on the brink of a descent into madness and obsession. The line between reality and the unknown was thinner than I had ever imagined, and I couldn't help but fear what lurked on the other side. Living with roommates was nothing new to me. In fact, it had been a significant part of my adult life since graduating from college. The shared rent, responsibilities, and the occasional company of fellow housemates had always seemed like a reasonable arrangement. But when my new roommate, John, introduced me to his girlfriend, Sarah, our home dynamic took a turn into uncharted territory, revealing a dark secret that would forever change my perspective on shared living. John had moved in about a month ago, taking over the room across the hall from mine in our cozy two-bedroom apartment. He was a friendly, easygoing guy, always ready with a joke or a helping hand when needed. He had mentioned his girlfriend, Sarah, a few times in passing, but I hadn't had the chance to meet her until one fateful Friday evening. I was relaxing in the living room, engrossed in a book, when I heard the front door swing open, followed by the muffled sound of conversation. I looked up as John and a woman entered the apartment. She was petite, with a cascade of jet black hair and an air of mystery that seemed to envelop her. "Hey, this is Sarah," John said with a warm smile. "Sarah, meet my roommate, Alex." Sarah extended her hand and I shook it, offering a polite greeting. There was something about her that piqued my curiosity, a sense that there was more to her than met the eye. But I dismissed it as mere intrigue, thinking that perhaps it was just my overactive imagination. As the weeks went by, Sarah became a regular presence in our apartment. She and John spent most evenings together, cooking dinner, watching movies, and sharing stories of their day. On the surface, they appeared to be the picture-perfect couple, deeply in love and genuinely happy. However, I couldn't help but notice that Sarah had a certain aloofness about her. She would often retreat into herself, lost in thought as if carrying a weighty secret. I tried to respect their privacy and dismissed it as a personal quirk, but a growing unease began to gnaw at me. One evening, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Sarah. John had gone out to run some errands, leaving us in an awkward silence. I decided to break the ice. "So Sarah, how did you and John meet?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. Her eyes flickered with a shadow of something I couldn't quite place, a mixture of sadness and fear. "We met at a support group," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "A support group?" I asked, intrigued and concerned by her answer. Sarah hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Yes, it's a group for people who have experienced trauma," she said, choosing her words carefully. I could sense that Sarah was holding something back, something dark and painful. I didn't want to pry, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Trauma?" I asked gently, hoping she would open up a little more. She took a deep breath, her eyes welling with tears. "I can't go into details, but let's just say that we've both been through some really difficult times," she replied, her voice trembling. I didn't press her for more information, but her words left a lingering sense of unease. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of trauma had brought Sarah and John together, and what dark secret she was hiding beneath her quiet demeanor. Over the following weeks, I began to notice subtle changes in Sarah's behavior. She would often startle easily, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting danger to strike at any moment. Her cheerful moments with John grew fewer, replaced by long periods of brooding silence. One evening, as I was in my room working on a project, I overheard a heated argument between Sarah and John in the living room. Their voices were raised and I couldn't make out the words, but the tension in the air was palpable. It was the first time I had witnessed such a dispute between them, and it left me with a growing sense of concern. The following morning, I ran into John in the kitchen. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot from what appeared to be a sleepless night. "Is everything okay with you and Sarah?" I asked cautiously. John sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "We've been going through a rough patch lately," he admitted. "Sarah's been dealing with some personal demons, and it's been taking a toll on both of us." I wanted to offer my support, to reach out to Sarah and let her know that she wasn't alone, but I didn't know how to breach the subject without intruding on their privacy. Instead, I decided to keep a watchful eye on the situation, hoping that things would eventually improve. As the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong with Sarah. She had become increasingly withdrawn, rarely leaving the apartment except for her support group meetings. I had tried to strike up casual conversations with her, but she would respond with one-word answers, her eyes haunted by a deep sadness. One evening, as I was returning from work, I found Sarah sitting alone her eyes fixed on the flickering television screen. Her gaze was distant, and she appeared lost in a world of her own. "Sarah, are you okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned. She turned to look at me, her eyes welling with tears. "I can't do this anymore, Alex," she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. I sat down next to her, offering a comforting presence. "Do what, Sarah? You can talk to me." She hesitated for a moment, as if wrestling with her thoughts. Then, in a trembling voice, she began to reveal her dark secret. "I've been living in fear for years," she confessed, her words heavy with pain. "There's someone from my past, a dangerous person who's been haunting me. I thought I could escape, start a new life with John, but he's found me. And now he's threatening to destroy everything I hold dear." I listened in shock as Sarah recounted a harrowing tale of abuse, manipulation, and a relentless pursuit by a figure from her past. She had been forced to change her identity, move to a different city, and join the support group to escape the tormentor who had haunted her for so long. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, and I could see the terror in her eyes. It was a story of unimaginable suffering, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for her. "Why haven't you gone to the police?" I asked, my concern growing. Sarah's expression turned to one of sheer terror. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's always been one step ahead of me. If he finds out that I've gone to the police, he'll stop at nothing to find me. I can't put John or anyone else in danger." I realized that Sarah was trapped in a living nightmare, unable to escape the dark shadow of her past. It was a chilling revelation, and I knew that I had to do everything in my power to help her. Over the next few days, I worked with Sarah to develop a plan to ensure her safety. We installed security measures in our apartment, changed her routines, and she began attending therapy sessions to address the trauma she had endured. It was a small glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. But as we delved deeper into the intricacies of Sarah's past, it became clear that her tormentor was growing increasingly relentless. Strange and threatening messages would appear on our doorstep, and we would occasionally spot a shadowy figure lurking in the shadows near our building. The situation reached a breaking point one fateful night. John had gone out to run an errand, leaving Sarah and me alone in the apartment. As we sat in the living room, the lights suddenly went out, plunging us into darkness. Fear clenched at my chest as I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight. I could hear Sarah's rapid breathing, and I knew that we were not alone in the apartment. The sound of shuffling footsteps echoed through the darkness, drawing nearer with each passing moment. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, bathed in the dim glow of my phone's flashlight. It was a man, tall and menacing, with a look of malevolence in his eyes. He advanced toward us, a chilling smile on his lips. "Sarah, you can't hide from me," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. I sprang into action, doing my best to shield Sarah from the intruder. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to push him back and slam the door shut, locking it securely. "Call the police," I told Sarah urgently, as I braced the door with all my strength. Sarah dialed 911, and I could hear her shaky voice as she relayed our terrifying situation to the dispatcher. Meanwhile, the intruder pounded on the door, his threats growing more unhinged by the second. Minutes felt like hours as we waited for the police to arrive. The intruder continued his relentless assault on the door, and I could feel my strength waning. Just when it seemed like he might break through, the sound of sirens filled the air and the intruder fled into the night. The police arrived, taking our statements and promising to investigate the incident. It was a small victory, but it came at a great cost. Sarah was traumatized by the encounter, and the fear that had consumed her for so long had now become a horrifying reality. In the days that followed, Sarah and John decided to relocate to a different city, hoping to escape the relentless tormentor who had haunted their lives. I helped them pack their belongings and wished them well, hoping that the distance would finally provide them with the safety and peace they deserved. As I watched them drive away, I couldn't help but reflect on the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. Sarah's ordeal had been a stark reminder that the past can cast a long shadow, one that can engulf even the most promising futures. I returned to my apartment, grateful that Sarah and John were safe, but haunted by the knowledge that their tormentor was still out there, lurking in the shadows. It was a chilling reminder that sometimes, the darkest secrets are the ones that threaten to consume us whole, and that even in the face of unimaginable fear, there is always a glimmer of hope. And so as I settled back into my quiet, unassuming life, I couldn't help but wonder how many other individuals were living with their own dark secrets, how many others were grappling with the shadows of their pasts. It was a sobering thought, a reminder that we never truly know the demons that may be lurking just beneath the surface. The day we moved into Sterling House was like any other. The sun cast long shadows on the lawn as we carried our boxes through the creaking front door. My husband David and I had always dreamed of owning an old Victorian house, and Sterling House was the embodiment of that dream. It was a stately 3-story structure with a wraparound porch, intricate woodwork, and a history that whispered through its weathered walls. Our 2 children, Emily and Daniel, were thrilled at the idea of living in such a grand house, though there was one peculiar aspect that gave them pause. The townsfolk had whispered about the house, calling it haunted and cursed. They claimed it was a place of restless spirits and unexplained events. But we dismissed these stories as mere superstition, eager to start our new life. The first night in Sterling House was quiet and uneventful. We gathered in the cozy, old-fashioned living room to celebrate our new beginning. The fireplace crackled with life, and Emily and Daniel played with their toys. The only thing that seemed odd was the faint odor of roses that lingered in the air, but we attributed it to some old potpourri left behind by the previous owners. That night, as we settled into our respective rooms, I couldn't help but marvel at the house's character. The rooms were spacious, and the moonlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the hardwood floors. I fell asleep to the soothing sound of the wind rustling through the leaves outside. But then, in the dead of night, I was jolted awake by a soft, distant whisper. It was so faint that I couldn't make out the words. I lay in bed, straining my ears, but the voice disappeared as quickly as it had come. I shook off the cold feeling, blaming it on my imagination running wild. Over the next few weeks, strange things began to happen. Emily started having vivid nightmares, waking up in tears, speaking of a dark figure at the foot of her bed. Daniel claimed he saw his toys move on their own and heard whispers in the hallways. I too experienced the whispered voices at odd hours, and the scent of roses became more pronounced. David, ever the skeptic, brushed off our concerns, attributing it to stress and our overactive imaginations. He urged us to embrace the house's charm and history, rather than fear its supposed hauntings. One day, while I was cleaning out the attic, I came across a stack of old, dusty journals. They were filled with the handwritten thoughts and experiences of previous residents. The entries were a mix of mundane daily life and accounts of strange occurrences that mirrored our own. One sentence from the year 1923 stood out. "The whispers persist, and I can't bear to sleep in the master bedroom anymore. The scent of roses lingers, and I often feel a cold presence by my side. I know not what haunts this house, but I am certain it is not of this world." The journal was filled with similar stories, and it sent a cold breeze down my back. I shared my discovery with David, who, despite his skepticism, couldn't deny the scary connection between our experiences and those of the previous residents. As our unease grew, we decided to investigate the house's history. We discovered that a family named the Sterlings had lived in the house for generations until it was sold to the family we had purchased it from. The Sterlings had been prominent in the town, known for their wealth and power. Rumor had it that the family had a dark side, dabbling in the occult and dark practices. Determined to put an end to the unsettling occurrences, we decided to contact a local historian to learn more about the Sterling family's past. The historian, Mrs. Anderson, was a frail elderly woman with a wealth of knowledge about the town's history. She invited us to her home to share her findings. Mrs. Anderson's living room was filled with ancient books and dusty tomes. She began to recount the history of the Sterlings, explaining that they had been obsessed with the occult and the afterlife. They were rumored to have performed dark rituals within the house, and it was said that they had communed with the dead. The Sterlings were searching for something beyond the realm of the living, Mrs. Anderson said. They believed that the house held a gateway to another world, and their experiments were their attempt to bridge the gap between life and death. As she spoke, I couldn't help but wonder if the strange occurrences we'd experienced were somehow linked to the Sterling family's obsession with the supernatural. Mrs. Anderson offered to help us cleanse the house and rid it of any lingering negative energy. She explained that we needed to perform a ritual that would break the connection between our world and the other side. That night we gathered in the living room, the hearth crackling with a warm fire. Mrs. Anderson led the ritual, guiding us through each step. We lit candles, burned sage, and recited incantations to banish any lingering spirits. As we chanted, the air grew heavy and the scent of roses became overpowering. A soft wind rustled through the curtains. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped and a shadowy figure materialized before us. It was a woman, her eyes hollow and sorrowful. She seemed to be from another time, dressed in a gown reminiscent of the early 1900s. Her presence made my blood freeze. The figure spoke in a soft, mournful voice. "You have awakened me from my slumber. I am Isabella Sterling, and I have been trapped in this house for eternity. The experiments of my family tethered me to this realm, and I have longed for release." Tears welled up in her eyes as she told us her story. Isabella explained that she had been an innocent victim of her family's dark pursuits. They had used her as a vessel to communicate with the dead, and her spirit had been bound to the house ever since. We felt a deep sympathy for Isabella, trapped in a liminal state between life and death. Mrs. Anderson continued the ritual, beseeching Isabella to find peace and move on to the afterlife. Isabella's form began to waver, and her voice faded as she gradually disappeared into the ether. The room grew still and the scent of roses lifted. It was as though the weight of centuries had been lifted from Sterling House. We completed the ritual, ensuring that Isabella's spirit had found the release it had longed for. In the days that followed, the house felt different. The air was lighter, and the unsettling occurrences ceased. Emily and Daniel's nightmares subsided, and the whispers that had haunted us for weeks disappeared. It was as if the house had been cleansed of its dark past. Sterling House, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a warm and welcoming home. Isabella's presence no longer lingered, and the history that had whispered through its walls was now a distant echo. We had finally found peace in our new home. As the years passed, we cherished our time in Sterling House. It had become a place of happiness, where our family had grown. My name is Alex Holloway, and I never believed in ghosts until I moved into Hollywood House. I had inherited the old Victorian mansion from a distant relative I'd never met. The news of my sudden inheritance came as a shock, but the prospect of living in such a grand, historic house excited me. Little did I know that the house came with a history that would test the very limits of my skepticism. I had always considered myself a rational, level-headed person. I was an engineer by profession, and I approached life with a practical and analytical mindset. Ghost stories were nothing more than tales told around campfires designed to scare and amuse. But that was before I set foot in Hollywood House. The mansion sat atop a hill overlooking the sleepy town of Hollywood. The exterior was a sight to behold, with its ornate architecture, towering turrets, and sprawling gardens. It was a place that seemed to belong to a different era, and the townsfolk whispered about its dark past. The house had stood empty for as long as anyone could remember, and its imposing presence cast a shadow over the town. My first night in Hollywood House was a surreal experience. As I walked through the echoing hallways with a single flickering candle, I couldn't help but wonder about the stories I'd heard. People claimed to have seen figures in the windows at night, heard unexplained footsteps in the empty corridors, and witnessed lights flicker and doors open and close on their own. These were the tales that had earned the mansion its haunted reputation. I settled into one of the spacious bedrooms on the second floor, the large canopy bed and heavy drapes making me feel like I'd stepped into a period drama. As I lay in bed, I tried to dismiss the unease I felt. The wind whistled through the old windows, and the house seemed to sigh with its own ancient history. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I heard it, a faint, distant whisper. I dismissed it as a trick of the wind or my own overactive imagination. But the whisper persisted, growing louder and more distinct. It was as though a voice from the past was trying to communicate with me. I strained my ears, and the words became clearer. "Help me," the voice pleaded, soft and trembling. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, my breaths coming quick and shallow. The voice sounded desperate, like a soul in torment. I leaped out of bed and searched the room, but there was no one to be found. The windows were shut tight and the doors were locked. I had heard the voice, there was no doubt about it, but its source remained a mystery. In the following days, I tried to put the incident out of my mind, convincing myself that it had been a vivid dream. I was determined not to let such irrational thoughts take hold of me. I delved into my work, focusing on renovations to make the house livable. However, the feeling of being watched and the whispers persisted. It was as though the house itself was trying to communicate with me, to tell me something I couldn't yet comprehend. One evening, as I was exploring the dusty attic, I came across a trove of old letters and journals. They were written by the previous inhabitants of Hollywood House, the Eldridges, who had lived there in the late 19th century. The journals were filled with accounts of strange occurrences that mirrored my own experiences. One of them caught my eye. The house is not what it seems. It harbors a presence that defies explanation. We hear the whispers at night, voices from another world, and the shadows move with a purpose we cannot comprehend. The house is cursed, and it hungers for something we cannot fathom. The journals were filled with similar stories, of doors that opened on their own, of apparitions in the hallways, and of voices that pleaded for help. The Eldridges had lived in constant fear, and they eventually abandoned the house, leaving it to decay. I couldn't ignore the striking similarities between their experiences and my own. The house was not just haunted, it was cursed, as if an insatiable darkness clung to its very foundations. As I continued my research, I learned that the house had been built on the site of a tragic event, a fire that had claimed the lives of several townspeople. It was said that the souls of those who had perished in the fire were never at rest, and their restless spirits haunted the mansion. My skepticism wavered as the evidence piled up. The history of Hollywood House was filled with inexplicable events and unexplained phenomena. It was clear that the house held secrets that defied logic and reason. One night, as I sat in the library, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to surround me, as if the walls themselves were trying to communicate. I strained to listen, and the voice became distinct, a woman's voice filled with anguish. "Help me," she implored, her words resonating with sorrow. I followed the voice to the grand staircase, where a shadowy figure materialized before me. It was a woman, her eyes filled with despair. She was dressed in a gown from a bygone era, and her form flickered in and out of existence. "My name is Eleanor," she said, her voice trembling. "I died in the fire, and my spirit has been trapped here ever since. You are our only hope." Eleanor's story was one of tragedy. She had been a resident of Hollywood, a young woman with dreams and aspirations, until the fateful night of the fire. She had perished along with others, and their spirits had been bound to the house, unable to find peace. I couldn't turn my back on Eleanor's plea for help. I reached out to a local historian, Mr. Thompson, who had spent years researching the history of Hollywood House. He explained that the house was a focal point for paranormal activity, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin. With Mr. Thompson's guidance, we decided to conduct a ritual to free the trapped souls and cleanse the house of its dark history. We gathered in the living room, surrounded by candles and incense, and recited incantations passed down through generations. As we chanted, the atmosphere grew heavy, and the air seemed to vibrate with energy. The whispers in the walls intensified, as if the spirits were aware of our intentions. I felt a presence in the room, a gathering of souls seeking release. Suddenly, the room grew icy cold, and the shadowy figures of the trapped souls materialized before us. Eleanor, along with others, stood in a solemn assembly, their eyes filled with gratitude and longing. The atmosphere was charged with emotion as we completed the ritual. The spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the ether. Eleanor's voice, filled with relief, echoed through the room. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. The house fell silent, and the weight of its cursed history seemed to lift. The whispers were gone, and the oppressive atmosphere had dissipated. I had not only inherited a haunted house, but had played a part in setting its restless souls free. In the weeks that followed, Hollywood House no longer felt haunted. It was a place of serenity, with no whispers or unexplained phenomena. The history of the mansion had changed from one of darkness to one of redemption. As I continued my life in Hollywood, I couldn't help but reflect on the mysteries of the house. I had learned that sometimes the unexplainable defied the rational mind. The spirits that had haunted the house were not malevolent, but trapped souls seeking release from their torment. I had been a part of their liberation, and the experience had forever altered my perception of the supernatural. Hollywood House, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a sanctuary of peace and redemption. Its history no longer whispered of despair, but of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of compassion and understanding. And as I looked out at the town of Hollywood from the mansion's grand windows, I knew that the house had found its own peace, and so had I. And as I looked out at the town of Hollywood from the mansion's grand windows, I knew that the house had found its own peace, and so had I. I had always imagined that the first year of marriage would be full of love, laughter, and adventure. My husband John and I were excited to begin this journey together. Little did we know that our adventure would take us to a place shrouded in mystery and darkness, a house with a history that had the townsfolk filled with fear. The house stood at the end of Willow Street, an imposing Victorian structure that loomed over the neighborhood. The moment we laid eyes on it, we fell in love. The high, arched windows, the ornate wooden details, and the sprawling garden in the back. Everything about the house was perfect. We were told that it had been empty for years, but no one seemed eager to share the reason. As we moved in, I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. The house had an air of antiquity, with creaking floorboards and long, dark hallways. The previous owner had left behind old, dusty furniture that seemed to belong to another era. The entire place was a throwback to the 19th century. We spent our first few days unpacking and exploring our new home. The living room was adorned with a grand fireplace, and a beautiful chandelier hung from the ceiling. It was the perfect place for cozy evenings together. The kitchen, though outdated, had a charming feel, and I couldn't wait to cook our first meal there. The bedroom, with its heavy drapes and old-fashioned wardrobe, was both enchanting and slightly eerie. It wasn't long before strange occurrences began. At first, it was the soft whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls. John and I exchanged nervous glances as we tried to make out the words. The whispers were unintelligible, but they sounded like voices from another time. One evening, as we sat in the living room, we heard the whispers again. This time, I was certain that the voice said, "Help me." I shivered and looked at John, who had a concerned expression. He dismissed it as a draft or our imagination, but the unease lingered. As the weeks went by, the whispers grew more frequent. I decided to confide in our neighbor, Mrs. Davis, who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. She was known as the local historian and a keeper of town secrets. Mrs. Davis listened to my story with a knowing look. "That house, dear," she began. "It has a history and not a pleasant one. It was built by a wealthy family in the late 1800s, the Chattertons. They were reclusive, strange people, and the townsfolk had always whispered about their dark practices. She paused for effect. The Chattertons dabbled in the occult, trying to communicate with the dead. They believed the house had a connection to the spirit world, and they performed rituals in the hopes of unlocking its secrets. My heart raced as I realized that the whispers we heard might be connected to the Chattertons' experiments. Mrs. Davis went on. It said that they summoned a presence they couldn't control, and it cursed the house. After that, no one dared to live there, and the Chatterton family vanished without a trace. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The house we had so eagerly moved into had a dark and chilling history. But what could we do? We had just started our life together, and leaving wasn't an option. We decided to research the house's history and learn more about the Chatterton family. Our research led us to old newspaper clippings and journal entries from the late 1800s. The more we discovered, the more we realized the depth of the Chatterton family's obsession with the supernatural. They believed that the house was a portal to the afterlife and that they could communicate with the dead through seances and dark rituals. One journal in particular made my pulse rise. The whispers grow louder, and I fear we have awakened something dark. Shadows move through the house at night, and I've seen apparitions in the hallways. We must find a way to undo what we've done before it's too late. It was evident that the Chattertons had unleashed something beyond their control, and it had plagued the house ever since. As we delved deeper into the history, we couldn't ignore the increasing occurrences in the house. Doors would open and close on their own, and we heard footsteps in empty rooms. The whispers continued, and I couldn't help but feel that they were trying to tell us something. One night we awoke to the sound of a child crying. John rushed out of bed and followed the sound to the nursery. There he saw a faint, ghostly figure, a little girl in a white dress. She turned to him with tearful eyes, her voice trembling as she said, "Help me, please." As he reached out to touch her, she disappeared into thin air. John returned to our room, his face pale. "I saw her," he said, his voice shaking. "A little girl, just like the one from the old photographs we found in the attic. She was asking for help." We couldn't ignore the plea of the ghostly child any longer. We reached out to Mrs. Davis once more, hoping she could shed light on the mysterious girl. She listened intently and revealed that the Chattertons had a daughter, Emily, who had gone missing and was never found. It was believed that the entity they had summoned had taken her, and her spirit was trapped in the house. We realized that Emily's spirit was trying to communicate with us, asking for the help she never received in life. We couldn't turn our backs on her, and we decided to try and find a way to release her from the house's curse. Mrs. Davis suggested that we perform a ritual to free Emily's spirit. She explained that it would be a way to break the connection between the Chattertons' experiments and the trapped souls. We were hesitant but desperate to bring peace to the house. With Mrs. Davis's guidance, we gathered the necessary materials and prepared for the ritual. The air grew heavy as we lit candles, burned sage, and chanted incantations. The whispers in the walls grew louder and more frantic, as if the spirits were aware of our intentions. In the midst of the ritual, a chill filled the room and a shadowy figure appeared before us. It was Emily, her eyes filled with both fear and longing. She whispered, "Thank you," before slowly fading away, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of relief. As the ritual concluded, the house fell silent. The whispers were gone and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. It was as though the curse that had plagued the house for decades had finally been broken. We felt a sense of peace we had never experienced before. In the weeks that followed, the house no longer felt haunted. It was a place of warmth, and we could finally enjoy our marriage without the constant presence of restless spirits. Emily had found her release, and the darkness that had clung to the house had dissipated. As I watched my family's car disappear into the distance, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. My parents were heading out of town for the weekend, leaving me alone in our old creaky house. I was no stranger to solitude, but this time felt different. A heavy feeling settled in my chest, and an unshakable feeling of dread began to creep into my thoughts. The house itself was a relic of the past, a grand structure with imposing pillars and a sprawling, overgrown garden. It was beautiful in its own way, but as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the property, It transformed into something foreboding. I reluctantly closed the front door and locked it, the click echoing through the empty hallway. The house felt too big, too silent, and suddenly, I felt too small. The first night alone in a house could be daunting, but as time wore on, I had imagined myself growing into the role. I could make my own meals, watch my favorite movies, and revel in the freedom of being the master of my own domain. Yet as I moved from room to room, something about the darkness outside felt oppressive, as if it were closing in on me. I made my way to the kitchen, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. The familiar space, with its warm wooden cabinets and cozy ambience, was meant to be comforting. However, the faintest hint of a draft seemed to whisper through the room. I tightened the shawl around my shoulders and decided to prepare a simple meal to distract myself. As I stood at the stove, the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock were the only sounds that reached my ears. The house was eerily silent, and with each creak and groan, I couldn't help but feel as though it had a life of its own. I had always known it was old, but that night, it felt ancient, bearing secrets from generations long past. I finished my meal and tried to find solace in the glow of the television. I put on a comedy, but even the laugh track couldn't drown out the unsettling sense of isolation. The show's canned laughter sounded more like mocking than mirth, and I switched it off, casting the room into silence once more. Reluctantly, I made my way upstairs to my bedroom. The old wooden steps creaked beneath my weight, creating a symphony of unsettling sounds. I couldn't help but look over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows behind me. Of course, there was nothing there, but that didn't stop the creeping feeling that I was not alone. My bedroom, with its soft muted colors and familiar scent, should have been a sanctuary, but that night, it was just another chamber in the house of unease. The window offered a view of the moonlit garden, its unkempt hedges and statues shrouded in a cold glow. I closed the curtains and turned off the lights, plunging the room into darkness. Lying in bed, I couldn't help but listen to the strange sounds of the old house. It was as if it were alive, breathing in the night, exhaling soft sighs and whispers. I closed my eyes and tried to remind myself that it was just an old house, that my unease was nothing more than my imagination running wild. Yet, despite my rationalizations, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Hours passed, and the darkness seemed to press down on me, heavy and suffocating. I tossed and turned in bed, unable to find comfort. The gentle, rhythmic ticking of the clock in the hallway only served to remind me of the relentless passage of time. Just as I felt myself drifting into sleep, a noise from downstairs jolted me awake. It was a soft but distinct thud, followed by the sound of something scraping against the floor. My heart began to race, and I strained to listen. Silence settled in the room once more. I debated whether to investigate the source of the noise, but fear kept me frozen in place. The darkness outside my window seemed impenetrable, and the shadows in the room appeared to twist and contort. My imagination was running wild, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked in the house. Another noise, this one louder and more distinct, broke the silence. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the stairs. My heart pounded in my chest as the footsteps drew nearer, the creaking of the old wooden steps growing louder. I clutched the blanket tightly, unsure of what to do. My first instinct was to call the police, but the feeling of vulnerability kept me rooted in place. The footsteps reached the top of the staircase and drew closer to my bedroom. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled out of bed, searching for a place to hide. The closet seemed like the safest option, and I squeezed into it, pulling the door closed as quietly as I could. I left a slight crack to peer through, my eyes fixed on the dimly lit room beyond. The footsteps grew louder, and the door to my bedroom slowly creaked open. A figure emerged from the darkness, barely visible in the moonlight. It was a man, tall and slender, dressed in tattered clothing. His face was obscured, hidden by the shadows. He moved with a deliberate, almost predatory grace, as if he knew the house intimately. The intruder's presence sent a cold feeling down my spine. He moved through the room, his eyes scanning every corner. The moonlight revealed a gaunt face with hollow cheeks and a scruffy beard. In his hand, he held a knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. I held my breath as the intruder approached the closet. His steps were slow and deliberate, and I prayed that he wouldn't discover me. The closet door seemed like paper, too flimsy to protect me from the danger lurking just outside. My heart pounded in my chest, drowning out all other sounds. The man's hand reached for the closet door, and I braced myself for the inevitable. But then, just as his fingers brushed the wood, he hesitated. A low growl echoed through the room, causing the intruder to freeze. The sound was not human. It was primal and filled with menace. I strained to see what had caused it, and my eyes widened in terror. From the darkness of the room, a pair of glowing eyes emerged. They were feral, belonging to a creature that shouldn't exist within the confines of the house. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and the intruder backed away from the closet. In that moment, fear gave way to curiosity. I couldn't see the creature clearly, but I had the distinct feeling that it was not a typical household pet. It was something wild and untamed, a guardian of the darkness. The intruder, sensing that he was outmatched, fled from the room, leaving the closet door ajar. I waited, my heart still racing as the growling receded into the distance. I had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter, and the feeling of dread had shifted to one of profound gratitude. Hours passed, and the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains. With trembling hands, I emerged from the closet, still cautious and unsure of what I might find. The house was silent once more, and the intruder was gone. But the encounter had left an indelible mark on me. As I watched the sunrise, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe for the mysterious guardian that had protected me. The old house had revealed a hidden secret, a protector of the night that had stood between me and danger. The rest of the weekend passed without incident, and when my parents returned, I shared my harrowing experience with them. They were understandably shocked and concerned, but we found no sign of the intruder, and the police were unable to determine his identity. In the following weeks, I began to research the history of the house, hoping to uncover the origins of the guardian that had saved me. It was then that I stumbled upon an old, faded photograph, hidden in a dusty corner of the attic. The photograph depicted a man, tall and slender, dressed in tattered clothing. His face was obscured, but I recognized the scruffy beard and gaunt features. He was standing in the overgrown garden, his gaze fixed on something beyond the frame. The photograph was dated more than a century ago. I couldn't explain the connection between the intruder and the man in the photograph, but it was clear that the old house held secrets that spanned generations. The guardian that had protected me was a mystery, a part of the house's history that had come to life in the darkest of moments. As time passed, the sense of unease in the old house began to fade, replaced by a feeling of reverence for the guardian that had watched over it for generations. The creak of the front door echoed through the empty house as my parents departed for a weekend getaway, leaving my sister, Emily, and me alone. At 17, I was no stranger to spending time on my own. I turned to Emily, who was 12, and tried to muster a reassuring smile. "It's just the two of us this weekend, Em. We've got the whole house to ourselves." She nodded, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Yeah, but it's kind of creepy when it's so quiet." I couldn't argue with her. The silence in the house was overwhelming, a heavy presence that seemed to settle in every corner. I told myself it was the absence of our parents that made the house seem so much larger and emptier than usual. We had our dinner in the cozy kitchen, chatting about school and life, doing our best to chase away the unease. But no matter how much we talked, the silence of the house lingered in the background, like a watchful spirit. After dinner, I suggested we watch a movie to distract ourselves from the disconcerting atmosphere. We settled on a comedy, and Emily's laughter filled the room as the characters on the screen stumbled through their ridiculous antics. It was a welcome distraction, but even as we laughed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The movie ended and Emily stifled a yawn. "I'm heading to bed, you coming?" I shook my head. "I'll join you later. Just going to check things out downstairs first." She gave me a worried look but didn't protest. With a quick goodnight, she headed upstairs, leaving me alone in the dimly lit living room. The house seemed to creak and groan as I moved through it, its age and weight pressing down on me. The silence was so profound that it felt as though it was closing in, squeezing the very air from the room. I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the feeling of dread. As I passed the hallway leading to the basement, I heard a faint sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. I paused, my heart racing, straining to hear more. But the house remained still, as though it had swallowed the sound. Chalking it up to my imagination, I continued my exploration of the house. I made my way to the large, darkened living room, where heavy drapes blocked out the moonlight. I switched on the overhead light, dispelling some of the darkness that clung to the room. The furniture was old, relics from a different time, and the room held a sense of history that was both fascinating and unsettling. I'd heard stories of past occupants, tales of love and loss, of joy and sorrow, and sometimes it felt as though those stories were imprinted on the very walls. I moved to the bookshelves that lined one wall, running my fingers over the spines of old books and photo albums. As I leafed through one album, I came across a series of faded photographs. They depicted a family, a couple with 2 children, in a house that looked strikingly similar to the one I now lived in. There was something haunting about those photographs, a sense of familiarity and yet a gnawing discomfort. The faces in the photographs were unfamiliar, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow connected to the house, as though the past had reached out to touch the present. With a shiver, I closed the album and returned it to the shelf. The room had grown colder, and I could feel the presence of the past, lingering like a shadow in the corners. I decided it was time to head upstairs and join Emily. The heavy silence of the house had grown oppressive, and the stories of the past were pressing in on me. As I climbed the stairs, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper behind me, a voice carried on the wind, but when I turned, there was nothing there. I joined Emily in our shared bedroom, the dim glow of her nightlight casting dark shadows on the walls. She was already asleep, her breathing soft and steady. I climbed into my own bed, trying to put the unsettling feeling of the house behind me. But the night brought no solace. As I lay in the darkness, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. The room seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy, and I could hear the soft rustling of fabric and the gentle creak of floorboards, as if someone were moving through the house. Hours passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone in the room. I turned to look at Emily, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing there, and my unease only deepened. I decided to check on the source of the sounds, telling myself that it was probably just the old house settling. I climbed out of bed and made my way to the hallway. The darkness was thick, like a shroud, and I moved cautiously, guided only by the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. As I descended the stairs, the sounds grew louder, more distinct. It was as though the house had come to life, its walls murmuring secrets that had been long buried. I followed the sounds to the living room, where the overhead light flickered to life, casting a creepy glow on the room. And there, in the center of the room, I saw her, a young girl, no older than Emily, with long dark hair and eyes that held a haunting sadness. She was dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown, her feet bare and dirty. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and longing, as though she had been waiting for someone to finally see her. My heart raced as I took in the sight of the ghostly figure before me. I had heard the stories, tales of a young girl who had lived in the house long ago and had vanished without a trace. It was said that she had never left the house, that her spirit still lingered in the dark corners, searching for something lost. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the young girl reached out a hand toward me, her fingers trembling. And then, with a soft, plaintive whisper, she spoke. "Help me." The sound was barely audible, a faint echo in the night, but it gave me a scary feeling. I knew I had to do something, to find out what had happened to this lost soul, to help her find peace. But as I took a step toward her, she faded away, dissolving into the shadows. The house fell silent once more, the only sound the thudding of my own heart. I returned to my room, my mind racing with questions and fear. The young girl's presence had shaken me to my core, and I couldn't escape the feeling that her story was entwined with the history of the house. Morning came, and I told Emily about the ghostly encounter. She listened with wide eyes, her fear mirrored in my own. We decided to investigate the history of the house, hoping to uncover the mystery of the young girl and the stories that had been passed down through generations. Our research revealed a tragic tale. The young girl, named Isabella, had lived in the house with her family in the late 1800s. She had vanished one fateful night, leaving her family in despair. Despite extensive searches, she was never found, and her disappearance had remained a haunting mystery. As we delved deeper into the history, we learned that the house had passed through various owners over the years, and each had their own stories of unexplained phenomena and ghostly encounters. It seemed that Isabella's spirit had remained in the house, searching for answers and perhaps someone who could finally help her find peace. Determined to uncover the truth, we embarked on a quest to find out what had happened to Isabella. We scoured old records, visited local archives, and even interviewed descendants of past owners. Slowly, we pieced together a narrative of a family torn apart by tragedy, a series of secrets, and the mystery of a lost girl who had never found her way home. As we delved deeper into the past, we began to experience more encounters with Isabella's ghost. She appeared to us at night, her presence both scary and heart-wrenching. She would speak in soft, mournful whispers, imploring us to help her, to uncover the truth of what had happened on that fateful night so long ago. We couldn't deny her plea, and our determination to unravel the mystery only grew stronger. Together, we combed through the old attic, searching for clues that had remained hidden for generations. And then, as we sifted through dusty boxes and tattered letters, we made a discovery that creeped me out. Hidden beneath a pile of old photographs, we found a letter, its pages yellowed with age. It was a letter from Isabella to her parents, written on the night of her disappearance. In it, she revealed a secret, a forbidden love that had torn her family apart. As we read the letter, it became clear that Isabella had run away from home, unable to bear the pain of her family's disapproval. She had hoped to find her true love and start a new life, but fate had other plans. The letter ended abruptly, with no indication of what had happened to her. Armed with this new information, we continued our investigation, determined to uncover the full story of Isabella's disappearance. We tracked down old family records and discovered that she had indeed run away, eloping with her love, a poor artist from a neighboring town. Their love had been forbidden and their families had disowned them. Isabella and her love had struggled to make a life together, but tragedy had struck. They had been separated, and Isabella had vanished without a trace. Our research led us to a small, forgotten cemetery on the outskirts of town, where we found the final piece of the puzzle. Isabella's grave, a simple weathered headstone, marked her resting place. The date of her death was the same as the night she had disappeared. With heavy hearts, we realized that Isabella's ghost had been searching for closure, for someone to uncover the truth of her story. We had brought her one step closer to finding peace, but her presence in the house had not yet faded. We decided to hold a small private ceremony at Isabella's grave, a gesture of remembrance and closure. As we stood by her headstone, the air grew heavy, and we felt the weight of the past. Emily and I said our goodbyes to Isabella, thanking her for the lessons she had taught us about love, loss, and the enduring power of the human spirit. That night, as we returned to the house, we felt a profound sense of peace. Isabella's ghost, it seemed, had found the closure she had longed for, and the house was no longer filled with the haunting presence of the past. In the years that followed, the old house became a place of warmth and comfort, a sanctuary for our family. I sat alone in our old family home, the soft ticking of the antique clock on the wall the only sound to break the heavy silence. My parents had left for a week-long business trip, and I had volunteered to take care of our aging dog Max while they were away. I was 16, and spending a week on my own wasn't new to me. But as the evening sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the rooms, a feeling of unease crept in. The house, built in the early 1900s, bore the weight of its history, and every creak and groan seemed to carry with it a whisper of the past. Max, an old and arthritic Labrador, lay at my feet. His presence was comforting, a reminder of the familiar in this sea of uncertainty. I stroked his graying fur, my fingers finding solace in the soft rhythm of his breath. The first night alone in the house felt oddly disquieting. I made a simple dinner, and as I ate, the empty chairs around the dining table seemed to watch me, their emptiness unsettling. I turned on some music, hoping to drown out the silence, but it only seemed to echo through the empty rooms. After dinner, I took Max for a short walk in the garden, the chilly evening air offering a welcome break from the stifling quiet of the house. As we made our way back inside, the soft rustling of leaves in the garden seemed to carry secrets of their own. I shook off the feeling of unease and closed the door, locking it securely behind us. The evening passed uneventfully, and I settled in the living room to watch a movie. The flickering light from the screen cast shifting shadows across the walls, and for a moment I felt as if the house were holding its breath. I brushed the feeling aside and tried to immerse myself in the film. As the movie ended and the room plunged into darkness, I realized that it was time to head to bed. Max followed me upstairs, his slow, deliberate steps echoing through the hallway. The house was silent, and as I climbed into bed, I couldn't help but feel as though I were being watched. Sleep was elusive, and the silence seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. I tossed and turned, my thoughts racing through the labyrinth of the dark. The old house felt like a living, breathing entity, its walls listening to secrets long buried. Then, in the stillness of the night, a sound broke through, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like a finger gently rapping on a window pane. I listened intently, straining to locate the source of the sound. It was persistent, almost like a distant melody, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere within the house. As I slipped out of bed, Max's eyes followed me, his gaze filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The tapping grew louder, and I moved through the hallway, trying to pinpoint its origin. It was as if the very walls were murmuring, carrying with them a haunting melody. I reached the top of the stairs and followed the sound down to the living room. The tapping led me to the large bay window that overlooked the garden. I gazed outside, my breath catching in my throat as I saw what had been making the sound. A gnarled tree branch swaying in the wind and brushing against the glass. Relief washed over me, and I laughed at my own jittery nerves. It was just a tree branch, a trick of the wind, but in the stillness of the house it had taken on an eerie presence. I made a mental note to trim the branch the next day and returned to bed. Max followed me, and with his reassuring presence, I gradually drifted off to sleep. The house settled into an uneasy quiet, and I thought I could hear the faint echoes of footsteps in the dark, but I brushed it off as the stuff of dreams. The following day, I busied myself with chores around the house. I cleaned the rooms, trimmed the overgrown hedges in the garden, and even tackled the chore of trimming the troublesome tree branch outside the living room window. The sunlight cast long, comforting shadows across the property, and for a moment, the unease of the night before seemed like a distant memory. As the day turned into evening, I settled in the living room with Max, watching TV. The laughter of the characters on the screen was a comforting contrast to the silence of the house. I had almost forgotten the strange events of the previous night when the tapping sound returned. It was just as rhythmic and insistent as before, and this time I couldn't deny the feeling that it was coming from within the house. I muted the television and listened carefully, trying to locate the source of the sound. Max, too, lifted his head, his ears perked in the direction of the living room window. The tapping seemed to grow louder, more urgent, and I realized it was coming from the basement. I had never been particularly fond of the basement, with its old creaky stairs and dimly lit corners, but I couldn't ignore the persistent sound. With Max at my side, I made my way to the basement door, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence in the house had turned oppressive, and the tapping seemed to be a defiant challenge to that silence. I took a deep breath and descended into the dimly lit basement. The tapping grew louder as I reached the bottom of the stairs, and my eyes were drawn to a small narrow window set high in the basement wall. The window was covered by a tattered curtain, its fabric moving gently in the breeze. And as I approached, I realized that the tapping sound was the curtain brushing against the window frame. Relief washed over me, and I chuckled at my own jittery nerves. It was just the wind, the same wind that had caused the tree branch to tap against the living room window the night before. I made a mental note to secure the curtain and headed back upstairs with Max. That night, I settled into bed with Max at my side, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the previous nights. Sleep once again proved elusive, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I listened to the soft sound of Max's breathing, grateful for his presence. Just as I began to drift off, a sound broke through the stillness, a low, mournful howl. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. It was Max, his head tilted back, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. The howl was not his own, but it seemed to be coming from somewhere within the house. I called out to Max, trying to calm him, but his howling continued. I could feel the unease from the previous nights returning, and the house seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. I knew I had to investigate the source of the sound. With Max following closely, I made my way downstairs, my unease growing with each step. The howling was louder now, echoing through the house like a mournful lament. It seemed to be coming from the basement once again. I reached the basement door and descended the stairs, the howling growing more distinct. It was as though the sound was beckoning me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I reached the basement window, the same one where I had discovered the tapping curtain the night before. But this time the curtain was still and the window was closed. The howling continued, its source elusive. I could feel Max's distress, his eyes fixed on the dark corners of the basement, as though he could sense something I couldn't. I called out once more, trying to calm Max and to dispel the unease that had settled over me. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the howling ceased. The house fell into silence once more, the only sound the soft ticking of the antique clock on the wall. I retreated from the basement, Max at my side, a sense of foreboding settling over me. I couldn't explain the source of the howling, but it was clear that the old house held mysteries that extended beyond its walls. As I climbed back into bed, I couldn't escape the feeling that the house itself was trying to communicate with me. Morning came and I decided to delve into the history of the house, hoping to uncover the mysteries that seemed to be lurking within its walls. I learned that the house had been built in the early 1900s by a prominent family, but their history was shrouded in secrecy. As I delved deeper, I uncovered a newspaper article from the early 1920s. The article described a tragic event, a fire that had claimed the lives of the family who had built the house. The fire had been a mystery, its cause never determined, and it had left the house empty and abandoned for years. I couldn't ignore the feeling of unease that settled over me as I read the article. It was as though the events of the past were reaching out to touch the present, their stories carried on the wind, in the tapping of branches and in the mournful howling that had filled the house. I decided to explore the basement once more, convinced that it held the key to the mysteries of the house. As I descended the stairs, the unease in the air grew heavier, and the basement seemed to shift and contort as though it were a place of secrets long buried. I made my way to the narrow window, the same one where I had discovered the tapping curtain. But this time as I approached, I noticed something strange, a soft, ghostly figure that seemed to be standing just beyond the glass. The figure was indistinct, its features blurred, and it was difficult to make out any details, but there was no denying the sense of a presence, a silent observer who had been watching from the shadows. With trepidation, I reached for the curtain, pulling it aside to reveal the basement window. The figure remained, its eyes fixed on me, and for a moment I felt as though I were looking into the past, into a world that had long since vanished. The figure's eyes held a haunting sadness, a plea for understanding, and it seemed to be reaching out to me, trying to convey a message. I couldn't explain the presence of the figure, but it was clear that it was connected to the mysteries of the house. As I watched, the figure slowly faded away, dissipating into the darkness. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, and the unease that had settled over it began to lift. I returned to my room, my mind racing with questions and fear. The figure in the basement had shown me that the house held secrets that extended beyond its walls, that its history was a tapestry of tragedy and loss. And as I watched the sunrise from my bedroom window, I couldn't help but feel that the house was not just a structure, but a living entity, a repository of stories that were waiting to be uncovered. In the days that followed, I continued my research into the history of the house, determined to uncover the secrets that had long been buried. The figure in the basement had been a messenger, a reminder that the past could not be forgotten, that the stories of those who had lived in the house were still waiting to be told. As I uncovered more of the house's history, I realized that it was a place of both darkness and light, a sanctuary for the lost and a repository of the past. The mysteries of the house had become a part of my own story, a testament to the enduring power of history and the importance of uncovering the truth,